Chapter 488. These essence and blood had initially been suppressed by the Blood Emperor seal. However, that suppression force had been uplifted since that the Blood Emperor seal had been snatched away by Yi Shiwen, and hence, the essence and blood had broken out at once. Yi Shiwen shouted and stretched out his big hand to grasp. A golden big hand emitted abundant of golden rays of light in the clouds as it extended in the sky. And those boundless essence and energy were immediately grabbed by Yi Shiwen's big hand. Yi Shiwen felt that the resentful souls lingering in these essence and blood were eating at his golden divinities. The divinities represented the most positive force between the heaven and earth. It was the most noble and mystical power in the world. But those resentful souls were the most negative force. So, these two opposite forces began to boil and roll inside Yi Shiwen's palm. Yi Shiwen knew that his entire divinities would be consumed if it continued like this. And he would have the same fate as those people who had been eaten alive a moment ago. Yi Shiwen, you will die. Ha 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 ha. You are presumptuous if you think you will be able to control these essence and blood. Even I had no choice but to take help of the Blood Emperor seal to keep them in check. How else could you have defeated me so easily? The blood-red-clothed young master laughed wildly and said he had nothing to be afraid of right now. So he fearlessly provoked Yi Shiwen. Only a miracle could help him with escaping in the situation he was current in. So he had nothing to be afraid of. Shut up. Yi Shiwen chained him up inside the space and isolated his consciousness so that he couldn't see anything outside. Yi Shiwen considered for a moment. There was only one solution, and that was to refine these scarlet energies. And there was one such method in the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor power technique. He wasn't going to practice this power technique. However, that didn't mean that he couldn't borrow help from one of its methods. This was the best solution that he could think of at this time. Yi Shiwen took out the Heavenly Source Mirror without any hesitation. He contained these essence and blood and rushed back to the Yuan school. The majority of the abilities of the Heavenly Source Mirror had withered after Yi-Mo had fallen into deep sleep. This was also a disadvantage of having a tool spirit. Yi Shiwen could have obtained complete control over the Heavenly Source Mirror if there wasn't any tool spirit inside it. However, he didn't have any regrets because he might not have come so far if he had erased Yi-Mo's spiritual knowledge back then. He had hurriedly transferred them inside a segregated microcosm after he returned to the Yuan school. This microcosm had been dedicated for his closed-door training. And he began the closed-door training after he had planted the matrix formation and protective barriers. Yi Shiwen cleared his thoughts as he sat cross-legged under the enlightening mind ancient tree. And the entirety of those distracting thoughts suddenly vanished from his mind. Not a single distracting thought could affect his mind anymore, and this kept his consciousness pure and clear. The effectiveness of enlightening mind ancient tree was truly extraordinary. Yi Shiwen felt that his mind had become empty. In fact, the enlightening mind ancient tree had also helped him a lot when he had comprehended the Big Bang Stardust Fist. The biggest advantage of the enlightening mind ancient tree was that it could help an expert to enter a state similar to the moment of enlightenment. Everyone wanted to attain such a mental state. However, they couldn't achieve it. However, one could achieve such mental state with the help of the enlightening mind ancient tree. The mysterious space was quite incredible. However, it couldn't provide Yi Shiwen a true moment of enlightenment. It could certainly boost his comprehension of a technique to 100%. However, it could never boost his comprehension to more than 100% and couldn't give him any new insights. This was the limitation of the mysterious space. However, the enlightening mind ancient tree could help him in attaining that moment of enlightenment kind of state, and this could allow him to have new insights. In fact, it would make him capable of sensing even the subtlest of changes. Yi Shiwen had contained those huge blood clouds inside the Heavenly Source Mirror, and had started to refine them with every ounce of strength he possessed. Those scarlet energies started to get pulled out like threads from a cocoon as he used the Dark Spirit Blood Emperor power technique. And they transformed into a group of pure energy after undergoing the transformation inside the heavenly source mirror. They were then absorbed by him. This was also the reason why he had dared to attempt this. The heavenly source mirror was capable of absorbing different kinds of energies and could then refine and transform them. The refined quantity wouldn't be much. However, the essence would be far more pure and completely harmless. So, there would be no worries in the future. The cultivation pace of Dark Spirit Blood Emperor Power technique was very fast. However, the problem was that there could be many dangers in the future. One's body could most likely explode, and they could die because of forcibly swallowing so much energy for cultivating it to the peak. The more one would cultivate it, the more dangerous it could be. Therefore, one must possess a myriad of methods to suppress these rogue energies. For example, that Blood Emperor seal wasn't only a divine tool. It was also one of the methods to suppress these possible dangers, because those boiling energies were required to be contained within one's body. The blood-red-clothed young master had finally lost to Yi Shiwen because he couldn't utilize the Blood Emperor seal to its full potential. And this was the thing which he was most resentful about at this time. Yi Shiwen didn't dare to relax, since he was in a situation where he could suffer a setback at any time. In fact, he was wholeheartedly submerged into his practice. Therefore, the energies were being gradually transformed and absorbed by him. Everything was fine in the beginning, and Yi Shiwen was transforming and absorbing the energies without any major trouble. However, he had no choice but to increase his refining speed, since more and more resentful souls had gradually begun to eat his divinities. Otherwise, those resentful souls would have eaten him alive even before he could transform and absorb the scarlet energies. Therefore, he had no choice but to gradually increase the conversion speed. Yi Shiwen's body had suddenly turned dark red, since his body was full of essence and blood, which were being converted into pure energy. It wasn't clear how many people had been slaughtered by the blood-red-clothed young master. He only felt that this power was nearly inexhaustible, and he couldn't absorb it in its entirety. He was left with no other choice. He could only use this immense power to sprint over to the next level. His only option was to strike the threshold of the late stage of the semi-sage realm in order to consume such enormous power. The observing person scripture was operating inside Yi Shiwen's body. His entire body transformed into the void of universe, and he was sitting in the middle of this universe. He was the only god of this universe. Enormous scarlet waves were frantically swirling inside the void of the universe. It was like the mighty ocean waves that crash against the shore. He was already surrounded by endless scarlet waves, and those scarlet waves were unceasingly striking against his body. It seemed as if they wanted to drown him. Yi Shiwen would absorb a part of those waves every time they'd strike his body, and then he would transform them into his own power. He looked like a mountain that had remained motionless since millions of years. He let these scarlet waves hit his body, and then he transformed them into his own energy. Yi Shiwen's power continued to increase little by little, and these scarlet waves also gradually decreased in volume. Bang! It wasn't clear how much time had passed. However, Yi Shiwen's power had reached a peak point. He took a deep breath and concentrated his entire power to break the barrier of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Bang! Yi Shiwen impacted the barrier, but failed. However, his countenance didn't show any change. Rather, he continued to attack the barrier. He commanded his observing person scripture to emit the real elemental energy so that he could unceasingly attack the barrier to corrode it. Failed. Failed yet again. Once again failed. Yi Shiwen didn't know how many times he had tried by now. He himself had gradually become numb. However, he had gradually become accustomed to it. His strength would advance by leaps and bounds if he made this breakthrough. However, making a breakthrough was 100 times more difficult for him as compared to an ordinary man, or perhaps 1,000 times. That was the reason why he'd always go out on adventures. He'd always apply a myriad of methods to make breakthroughs. An ordinary person's cultivation might have never advanced if they had come across such difficulties and barriers like Yi Shiwen. He attacked again and again. He'd attacked countless times in each attempt. He had become habituated to such delays while making a breakthrough long ago. So, he was in no hurry. Crack! Yi Shiwen heard the cracking sound deep in his heart. So, he habitually attacked the barrier of the late stage of the semi-sage realm once again. But he didn't fail this time. On the contrary, he broke the barrier of the late stage of the semi-sage realm in one attack. Yi Shiwen's aura finally had no obstacles. So, it unceasingly burst out of his body and surged across. Yi Shiwen heaved a sigh of relief. He had finally made the breakthrough into the late stage of the semi-sage realm. His fighting strength had also climbed up once again, and it had now reached the peak of the intermediate stage of the sage realm. He was now sure that he could contend against the weaker experts of the late stage of the sage realm. Moreover, his current strength was enough to sweep away the experts of the intermediate stage of the sage realm. This was an astonishing change for him. However, another problem had arrived in front of him once he had made the breakthrough into the late stage of the semi-sage realm. And that was, how would he make the breakthrough into the sage realm? His fighting strength had made the breakthrough into the sage realm. But his actual cultivation hadn't made the breakthrough into the sage realm. In fact, his fighting strength had already made the breakthrough into the sage realm long ago. However, this had also brought a huge trouble for him. His fighting strength was making the breakthroughs at a very fast speed, but his cultivation realm couldn't keep up with that speed, and this had made the thresholds even stronger and more firm for him. Hence, making a breakthrough had become countless times more difficult for him than an ordinary person. Therefore, he couldn't liberalize his fighting strength to grow uncontrollably. Perhaps he might not be able to cross a mountain like the sage realm in his entire life if he didn't control his fighting strength and it grew too far away from his reach. It was very difficult for him to make the breakthrough into the sage realm even at this stage. In fact, it was far more difficult for him than it was for an ordinary person. Those enormous scarlet energies couldn't help him to enter the sage realm. However, Yi Shiwen recalled many pill-making methods at this time. In fact, Yi Mo had once comprehended many pill-making methods. He had learned to concoct a myriad of medicinal pills, and they had ranged from low-quality ones to the high-quality ones. Yi Mo's previous master, the mighty Devil Lord, had once traveled through many worlds unhindered and had killed countless alchemy masters who used to refine medicinal pills. Consequently, he had obtained methods for a variety of pills. One of those medicinal pills could help a person to make the breakthrough into the sage realm. Moreover, there were different kinds of such pills. Yi Shiwen quickly picked one of those pills, Break Sage Yellow Pill. Yi Shiwen knew many such pill-making methods. However, he didn't wish to walk on the path of alchemy. Moreover, it was simply impossible to walk on this road by merely depending upon his unorthodox methods. One must know that the research and refinement behind each alchemy method required the support of huge volume of resources and medicinal ingredients. In fact, almost every renowned alchemy master of the past had been supported by some big force. However, he had no choice at this time. He needed to take this road since he felt that it was difficult to make the breakthrough into the sage realm. To be continued. Chapter 489. Chapter 489. Cuts off that dog's claw. Yi Shiwen realized that 1 year had passed after he came out from the secret territory of the Yuan School. Qi Fifan had already returned to the true martial university and had submerged himself into cultivation after they had helped the Yuan School in wiping out the Qi state's forces. The Yuan School was the only big force in the 10 countries of Southeast region at the moment. They couldn't deal with Qi coalition in the beginning. However, they had now defeated the Qi coalition and had even annihilated several sage experts. Yuan School was still busy in fixing those huge internal damages. None of the 5 big forces of the Great Yu State thought that they could dominate the whole land in the beginning. Even the people of the Yuan School found that they lacked the strength whenever they got the real opportunity. In fact, it was still a bit insufficient even if they put out the entirety of their resources. They had chosen a descendant of the royal clan of the Yu State to step onto the throne. Yuan school didn't care about the worldly matters as long as they were the most dominant martial art force in this territory and were free to cultivate in seclusion. Moreover, Yuan school didn't go on an expedition in the rest of Southeast region, nor did they swallow the entire territory by taking advantage of the prolonged dispute with the Great Wu state. This was very unlike of what everyone had thought. The majority of the strong forces had been uprooted in the clash between the Qi coalition and Yi Shiwen's team, and the Great Wu state didn't have any power left to resist as a result. So, the Yuan school had already expanded up to its limit when it came to expansion in the new territory. They would have also met the same fate as the Qi coalition had if they were to try and overstep their bounds. However, the Yu state had still managed to annex the Wu state despite the fact that each country had sustained huge casualties. Consequently, they had leapt up and had become the biggest force among the now 9 countries of the southeast region. Yi Shiwen also didn't stay any longer after he saw that the Great Yu state and Yuan school had already cleared the mess and had begun the post-war reconstruction. He returned to the True Martial University and began to collect the raw materials for the Break Sage Yellow Pill after he bid farewell to everyone in Yuan school. Yi Shiwen's current cultivation had become twice as strong as before. In fact, he had returned to the True Martial University from the Yuan school in just half an hour upon his rainbow light. His speed would have been even higher if he had used his devil wings. Yi Shiwen wasn't anxious. He had unceasingly organized his principles on his way back. He possessed 1,200 Tao principles, and each of them was terribly profound. In addition, his aura looked mysterious. His realm had gotten stuck in the late stage of the semi-sage realm, and it couldn't advance quickly. Therefore, he wasn't in a situation where he could continue to increase his principles. He could only deepen the understanding of these principles. His strength was enough to sweep away the powerful experts of the intermediate stage of the sage realm and some weak experts of the late stage of the sage realm. He could do things which others at his level couldn't. Yi Shiwen, the best way for you to make the breakthrough into the sage realm is by using alchemy to refine pills. The power of the medicinal pills can help you in crossing this threshold. Yi Mo's voice suddenly reverberated in Yi Shiwen's mind. His voice was still feeble. However, it had become much better than before. And Yi Shiwen nodded. He and Yi Mo had thought about this solution separately. He didn't care whether his foundation was unstable or not. His foundation was incredibly profound. The difficulty he'd face in making the breakthroughs every time had also made his accumulation 1,000 times more profound than that of an ordinary person's. Other people couldn't be compared with him in this aspect. So, he could digest any medicinal pill without any danger. How much have you recovered by now? Yi Shiwen asked. I've recovered a bit after swallowing the Blood Emperor's seal. However, it's still just a drop in the bucket. Yi Mo shook his head. He forced a smile and said, It mainly depends upon you now. The quicker your strength would promote, the quicker I will recover. It's 100 times more difficult for you to make a breakthrough than an ordinary person as per your current foundation. However, your fighting strength will advance and reach the peak of the sage realm once you make the breakthrough. It may even surpass the late stage of the sage realm. However, the biggest problem for you is that you must be careful of the schemes. Those rival sects must be targeting you. They will frequently plot against you by hook or by crook. Fortunately, you are in the domain of the True Martial University in the southern region. The True Martial University can look after you and protect you here. However, you may be chased down by countless forces once you venture out. Yi Mo said, I will be careful. However, how will I see the rainbow if I don't face the winds and rain? The small plants inside the greenhouse can't grow taller and stronger than a big tree in the wild. My present experiences are nothing in comparison to that ancient phoenix world. Yi Shiwen looked firm as he replied. He would often think about that humiliation when he had seen those people take Hua Menghan away. A rage had ignited in his heart. Don't take the unfair advantage of my young age. Everything would reverse once I grow older and more powerful. Just wait and see. Sigh, you. Yi Mo sighed. You still differed by far if that ancient phoenix world is your target. Yimo's voice again disappeared after he was done talking. He had again landed in a deep slumber. Yi Xuan didn't think much and entered the true martial university, treading on the rainbow light. However, he was surprised to see that the true martial university was in celebration mood at this time. He didn't know what kind of happy occasion this was. However, he wasn't interested in knowing that either. So, he directly went to the Merit Palace Hall to receive his reward. The opportunity to cultivate in the Water Moon Fairyland wasn't the only reward he had gotten for winning this time's martial arts competition. He had also obtained a reward in addition to this. And this reward was his personal floating peak. He had received this reward so that he could set up his personal abode for cultivation. Only some true disciples of the great sage realm used to enjoy such treatment, along with a few core disciples of the sage realm about whom the university was very optimistic. Even some other people who had provided great services used to get such treatments. And Yi Xuan had undoubtedly done both. He had killed many other Forces Heaven's Pride experts in this martial arts competition. The true martial university hadn't said it openly. However, it was a great service towards him in reality. Plus, his performance was extraordinary. Therefore, such reward for him was only natural. He had gone to the Water Moon Fairyland on the very next day of his victory in the championship. And he had gone to the Yuan school after he had come out of there. Therefore, he hadn't gotten a chance to collect his reward. So, it was the time to receive the reward now. These floating peak abodes were basically microcosms. Even the experts beyond the level of great sage couldn't spot someone if they were to practice inside such microcosms. It was said that each of these floating peaks had been personally crafted by the experts beyond great sage realm. So, these peaks possessed endless prowess. It was appropriate for a highly secretive person like Yi Xuan. What? My peak isn't here? Yi Xuan looked at the disciple at the front desk of the Merit Palace Hall with glaring eyes. Yes, Senior Brother Yi. The front desk disciple forced a smile as he saw Yi Xuan. He was merely at the legendary's great complete realm. He hadn't even entered the semi-sage realm. How he could withstand Yi Xuan's imposing aura. Yi Xuan had intentionally controlled his aura. However, even a tiny bit of it was enormous for this disciple. The Supreme Lord himself has rewarded me this peak. It can't possibly disappear like that. This joke isn't funny. Yi Xuan restrained that tiny bit of imposing aura that was leaking out. He also knew that there must be some problem, since this front desk disciple couldn't dare to defraud him. Well, Senior Brother Yi, the Merit Palace Hall's disciple somewhat hesitantly looked at Yi Xuan. Yi Xuan had joined the university after him, but he had become a senior expert now. However, he didn't have any complaints or hesitation in calling him Senior Brother. This world was such that powerful people were respected by others. In fact, the real reason is that Senior Brother Mu Shengjie has returned. The front desk disciple carefully looked around. It seemed as if he wanted to make sure that nobody was eavesdropping. He was quite careful. Yi Xuan searched his own memory, and he immediately remembered Mu Shengjie. This man used to be extremely popular in the true martial university. He was a senior disciple of the law enforcement hall back then. He had boasted great influence in the law enforcement hall. He was second only to the great lord and the elders of the law enforcement hall. However, it was a long time ago. It was said that he had taken a group of disciples to a remnant abode on True Martial University's expedition 100 years ago. The reason why Yi Xuan remembered this man was because Mu Shengjie and Big Brother Huang Wuji were sworn enemies. Both exceptional talents had arrived in the True Martial University at the same time. Thereafter, they had come into the limelight in the True Martial University. All other Heaven's Pride experts looked inferior to these two peak talents. However, both of them had soon become the most problematic individuals from Pride in the eyes of the True Martial University. Both of them were peak talents. However, they were also sworn enemies. In fact, they had a lifelong enmity between them. They would frequently oppose each other with equal bitterness. However, Huang Wuji had been sent into exile for several hundred years later. This was because he had killed a senior great sage expert of the law enforcement hall. And the True Martial University had become peaceful ever since. Yi Xuan clearly knew that Huang Wuji was ferocious. Therefore, he was impressed by this person who had frequently opposed the big brother with equal ferocity. What does his return have to do with me? Yishuan asked. What could be the relation between Mu Shengjie's return and him not getting the peak? It seems that senior brother Yi has recently returned from outside. That's probably why he still doesn't know. Senior brother Mu had led a lot of disciples on an expedition to a remnant abode 100 years ago. And he has brought that place and that abode under our true martial university's control now. The experts of the other forces have been wiped out. So, he has done a great service for the true martial university. The front desk disciple explained. An expression of reverence appeared on his face. Senior brother Mu has deliberately rewarded these disciples who had accompanied him on the expedition for their accomplishments. Many senior sage experts have been rewarded with floating peak abodes. And senior brother Mu has personally asked for and taken your peak. What? He has gone too far. Yishuan stared at him with his glaring eyes. He didn't give a rat's ass about Mu Sheng from where he had returned and whether he had done any great service or not. However, he had taken away the peak which belonged to him. This was clearly aimed at him. He couldn't believe that nobody would have warned Mu Shengjie when he was taking the peak, and informed him that this peak had been set aside for Yi Shiwen by the Supreme Lord. However, he had still taken it away. What did this show? This clearly showed that Mu Shengjie was targeting him. True martial university's floating peaks were precious. However, they were present in large quantities. There were many peaks that didn't have any owners. However, he had still taken away his peak. Wasn't this obvious? Good, he has done it now. Yi Shiwen laughed instead of being extremely angry. Senior brother Yi, you can choose another floating peak. The Supreme Lord has told me to give you any floating peak of your choice. The front desk disciple said, There's no need. They don't belong to me. So, I don't want them. However, I will cut off the claw of the dog who dares to touch my stuff. Yi Shiwen coldly replied. To be continued. Chapter 490. It was the Metropolis single peak, as that disciple had mentioned. In fact, there was no need to get too tangled with this matter. However, the opposite party had targeted him, and Yi Shiwen couldn't swallow this thing. Do you know whose hands the Metropolis single peak has fallen into? Yi Shiwen asked. I've heard that it has fallen into the hands of Do Hexing. He is a disciple of the previous session. He was quite famous among the disciples of the previous session. He later went on an expedition to those ruins along with senior brother Mu Shengjie, and he has returned now. I've also heard that he has already entered the Sage Realm. He has been rewarded with Metropolis Single Peak. That disciple answered. That disciple looked at Yi Shiwen. Sage Expert wasn't as exaggerated in existence for that disciple, unlike the people of the 10 countries of Southeast region. However, a Sage Expert was hard to match nonetheless. However, this man who stood before his eyes wasn't a pushover either. So, it wasn't good to make him angry either. In fact, one inappropriate sentence, and he might attack. Yi Shiwen didn't have a small number of murders to his name either. The Law Enforcement Hall was too flamboyant. It was an independent force that was big enough to rival the influence of the Merit Palace Hall. However, they were bound to face a fierce retaliation from him if they were to provoke him. There were only a handful of people in Hidden Star Peak, but all of them were rebellious and downright crazy. Even their leading disciple Huang Wuji had once been provoked like this, and the so-called might of the Law Enforcement Hall had groveled before his wrath. I will go and see who has dared to lay hands on my stuff. Yi Shiwen sneered. He took large strides and trod out of the Merit Palace Hall. He then transformed into a streamer of light and disappeared. There was a jubilant atmosphere on a floating peak located in the depths of the true martial university. Metropolis Single Peak was engraved on a huge stele at the foot of the mountain. There was a palace situated atop the floating peak. A group of disciples who were clad in different clothes were sitting in wooden chairs in a circle, and an approximately 25 or 26-year-old man was sitting on the main chair. His facial features looked rough and wild. He possessed a wild aura. The killing intention that he had honed during the expedition hadn't completely vanished yet. Many congratulations to Senior Brother Do on moving into your new home. A disciple took the initiative and cupped his hands in obeisance as he said. Other disciples also followed suit and cupped their hands in obeisance as they congratulated him. That man with rough and wild facial features was Do Hexing. His faintly looming principles and aura were leaking out of his body every now and then. Do Hexing let out a tiny smile in the face of everyone's praise. However, he was very happy inwardly. People hadn't been very optimistic about him in the beginning. Then he had left for the ruins along with Mu Xingjie, and he had obtained enough in return after his arrival at this time. The efforts he had made over the last 100 years hadn't gone in vain. I would also like to congratulate Senior Brother Do for attaining such a huge achievement and moving a step forward to the intermediate stage of the Sage Realm. An individual from other side congratulated him once again. The faces of the other people exposed a slightly envious look. Their cultivations had been at the same level as his in the beginning. However, they were still swaying in the initial stage of the Sage Realm at this time. In fact, some of them were still at the semi-Sage Realm. However, the other party had already entered the intermediate stage of the Sage Realm. So, it was evident that his cultivation must have been toned very well. "It's nothing." Do Hexing waved his hand. He tried to pretend that he didn't care about this thing. However, the smile at the corner of his mouth showed how complacent he was with his achievement. "However, I've heard that this abode belongs to some other disciples." Someone raised this topic. "I know. I've heard that he's the champion of this time's martial arts competition that had taken place between the four major forces." Someone who had heard about Yi Xuan added. These powerhouses of the sage experts didn't care about the new disciples. What was the value of a new Heaven's Pride expert for them? A new disciple may have become a Heaven's Pride expert, but the said individual was still a new disciple, nothing more. They didn't need to be wary of a new disciple. They could easily dominate the new disciples whenever they wanted to. "He is also a Heaven's Pride level expert," someone raised his eyebrow and said. They couldn't do anything regarding a Heaven's Pride of the same generation. However, they didn't worry much about these younger generation's Heaven's Pride experts. He might grow up to an astonishing condition in the future. However, that wouldn't happen anytime soon. So, there was nothing to be afraid of. Humph! He has merely won the martial arts competition, and he was rewarded with a floating peak? It's very unfair. We had gone on true martial university's expedition, so we should be the ones to get such a reward. What are those newbies in front of us? They are merely like flowers in a greenhouse. Do Hexing raised his eyebrows as he said in extreme anger. This was unfair in his opinion. He had been on true martial university's expedition for 100 years. So, he deserved such rewards. What did the Yi Xuan do? He had merely won the martial arts competition and had obtained such rewards in return. He believed that those high-level old fogies had gone blind. That semi-sage disciple who had revealed Yi Xiwen's identity looked at Do Hexing. He didn't know what to say. Yi Xuan hadn't merely won an ordinary martial arts competition. Furthermore, he had also slaughtered many peak Heaven's Pride experts of the rival forces. The result of such contribution might not be visible in a short time. However, everyone would come to know after a long time had passed. He had effectively eliminated many senior great sage experts of the future. Many of his victims may have become great sage-level enemies, but he had made them disappear without any trace. So, this reward wasn't excessive if one were to consider it in this light. However, he didn't say anything out loud since he was faced with the unanimous waves that were crusading against Yi Xuan. Moreover, he too was quite envious of Yi Xuan. You are right. These new disciples don't deserve floating peaks. Those higher-ups are doing a favor on them. I've heard that several other Heaven's Pride experts have been rewarded with their personal floating peak abodes. A sage disciple spoke up in a bitter tone. How long ago he had entered the sage realm. However, he still couldn't dare to think about having his own floating peak. Then, how could he bear to see these young talents getting theirs at such a young age? The new disciples are supposed to maintain low-key profile and cultivate with care. We aren't allowed to deal with them. Otherwise, we could easily crush them to death. Another unsatisfied disciple added. Humph! Humph! They haven't acted insolently yet. Do Hexing sneered and replied, "However, I've heard that Yi Shiwen is quite insolent. He gives no respect to our law enforcement hall." One disciple had clearly heard about Yi Zaiwen's previous accomplishments, especially the matter that he had killed the disciples of the law enforcement hall right after he had entered the true martial university. What did he do? Do Hexing frowned and asked. All of them were the disciples of the law enforcement hall. So, they were obviously the most sensitive with regard to matters when someone looked down upon their law enforcement hall. I've heard that he has killed many lower-ranked disciples of our law enforcement hall. Many cultivators of a younger generation that had been nurtured by our law enforcement hall have also died at his hands. That disciple replied, "Audacious." Do Hexing banged his fist on the table and shouted ferociously, "It seems that we have been gone for far too long. Many people have forgotten our law enforcement hall's prestige. One must be killed on the spot if they've dared to oppose our law enforcement. But he is still alive even though he has killed our law enforcement hall's people. Are you people pigs?" The faces of those disciples turned dark red as they were scolded. However, they couldn't say anything in reply. They had secretly started to hate Yi Shiwen even more. Would they have been scolded if it weren't for Yi Shiwen? Which inheritance does he belong to? I can't believe that this bastard has dared to disrespect our law enforcement hall. And he's still being shielded by someone. Do Hexing's piercing gaze swept across them. The murderous aura that he had nurtured throughout his expedition of 100 years had soon diffused in the surroundings. That Yi Shiwen is a disciple of the Hidden Star Peak. We had put pressure on every major inheritance and had asked them to ignore his application to join them. All of them were afraid to offend us for one mere disciple. However, the people of the Hidden Star Peak offered him shelter. Moreover, they have also opposed us many times. We thought that he's just an ordinary disciple. We didn't expect that he could grow to this extent. It's that Hidden Star Peak again. Do Hexing frowned and said, "It wasn't that they hadn't been able to deal with the people of the Hidden Star Peak this time alone. It had been this way since the start of that conflict between Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie. It should be mentioned that the law enforcement hall couldn't deal with many people. After all, many people weren't fond of law enforcement hall's overbearing methods. The Hidden Star Peak didn't have many people. However, the Hidden Star Peak was considered as an eyesore by the law enforcement hall because of Huang Wuji. Why not attack as soon as possible since we know that he's tough and it's difficult to deal with him? These cruel and untamed guys are the unstable elements that contaminate the university. So, it will be good for the university if we eradicate such people," Do Hexing suggested. He had forgotten that the disciples of the law enforcement hall couldn't be outdone when it came to being overbearing and unstable. Many high-level old fools are very optimistic about him. In fact, the old lord of Xian City has specially told our hall's lord to warn us against resorting to extreme methods against him. One disciple replied, "These old fools are taking unfair advantage of their positions. They are incompetent fools. Wait for senior brother Mu to occupy the top position of the Lord. We will sort such people out once that happens." Do Hexing clenched his fist and said, the other people weren't surprised either. The disciples of the law enforcement hall would often become the law enforcement's great lord. The great lord of the law enforcement hall was considered a big shot in the true martial university. In fact, the lord of the law enforcement hall stood side by side the supreme lord and the other big players in the university. In fact, even the Supreme Lord couldn't ignore the suggestions of the law enforcement hall's great lord. And Mu Xingjie had almost been accepted as the next lord of the law enforcement hall. Many other elites were also cultivating in the law enforcement hall, and many of them were classified as important cultivators as well. However, those people couldn't be compared with Mu Xingjie. In fact, most of them had been trained under Mu Xingjie, so he hardly had any decent opponent. Therefore, it was already final that Mu Xingjie would be the next great lord of the law enforcement hall. But Mu Xingjie wasn't satisfied with the position of the law enforcement's great lord. He was eyeing at the position of the supreme lord. Not a single disciple of the law enforcement hall had ever acquired the top position in the university. After all, one must think about the concerns of other powerful organizations as well. who would check and balance the growth of the law enforcement hall if a person of the law enforcement hall itself had reached at the top position. Therefore, the people having backgrounds in these authorities were often not selected for the top position. However, he didn't care. Nobody could stop him if he wanted to do something. In fact, he could create history since nobody had accomplished it before. This idea had enormously affected these disciples since they were under his control. Do Hexing's voice had barely faded when a loud shout suddenly sounded from outside. "Get out!" To be continued. Chapter 491. Get out! A loud shout came from outside. Who is daring to act so audaciously here? Everyone in the group looked at each other in shock. They hadn't expected that someone could arrive here and provoke them. Who are you? Do you have a death wish? How dare you intrude into our law enforcement hall's territory and provoke us? Everyone cursed in quick succession. This was akin to a tight slap on their faces. Who are you? Do Hexing asked the person who stood outside the metropolis single peak. He saw a young man who was approximately 20 years old. He was clad in black clothes. His complexion looked indifferent. He was standing firmly in midair. Yi Shiwen? Someone in this group recognized Yi Shiwen. Many of these retinues didn't approve of Yi Shiwen deep down in their hearts. However, his reputation had skyrocketed after the Four Forces martial arts competition. You're Yi Shiwen? Do Hexing coldly looked at this man who stood before his eyes and asked with some interest. You're Do Hexing? Yi Shiwen opened his mouth and asked. He frowned and said, Don't you know that this is my abode? I know. Do Hexing laughed mischievously. Then his facial expression turned sinister and started to look very ugly. But Do Hexing raised his head and shot a glance at Yi Shiwen. He then said, It's mine now. We won't move out of here. This is our law enforcement hall's area now. Let's attack him right now. Let's take the advantage of this opportunity and annihilate this insolent guy. Let's put him down. Several people shouted from behind Do Hexing. Many of them already considered Yi Shiwen to be an eyesore. Yi Ziwen's existence had enormously decreased the law enforcement hall's prestige and status. Moreover, many of their law enforcement hall's disciples had also sustained injuries because of him. So, they obviously weren't happy with Yi Shiwen. This man is someone who hesitates to do something until he's forced. He has even dared to come here by himself in order to kill all of us. I think those old guys won't have anything to say in this matter. Our law enforcement hall must restore its prestige since Senior Brother Mu has returned. A disciple maliciously spoke up. Yi Shiwen had killed several disciples of the law enforcement hall. However, he was still alive and kicking since the law enforcement hall hadn't been able to catch him. This was obviously a big humiliation for them. Even their leftover prestige had vanished. It wouldn't make up for this insult if they had gotten hold of this man who had killed their disciples and had offended their organization to such extent. The law enforcement hall was responsible for maintaining the laws of the true martial university. Therefore, the loss of their prestige was deadly for them. I was looking for an opportunity to teach you a lesson. However, I must slaughter you since you've offended my people. And I will restore the prestige of our law enforcement hall by doing this. Do Hexing roared loudly. He hadn't been present in the true martial university for 100 years. However, he had already formed a bad impression of Yi Shiwen from whatever he had heard about him thus far. How dare a trivial semi-sage expert be arrogant before me? Do Hexing suddenly attacked. He stretched out his hands and grabbed the spirit energies from the surroundings. Those spirit energies were absorbed by his hands and got transformed into a pair of big hands. Those big hands then swept down towards Yi Shiwen. It was a secret martial arts technique. It looked quite simple. However, it was an extremely exquisite martial arts technique. The entire space had been distorted under the hold of his hands. Is this the legendary technique Control, Crane's 7 Divine Hands? This secret martial technique is a supreme technique which was created by some almighty force if one is to believe the legends. One can grab the mountains and rivers and split them within their grasp if they are able to practice this technique to the peak. However, hasn't Senior Brother Mu obtained it? Senior Brother Mu had found this secret technique when he had made a narrow escape from the ruins. How has Senior Brother Do learned it? I know about this. It has been said that senior brother Mu has taught him a part of this technique because he had accomplished a great deed for him. He only knows a portion of this technique. However, it still possesses endless might. Senior brother Do has become one of the strongest experts of the intermediate stage of the Sage Realm, even though he has entered the intermediate stage of the Sage Realm very recently. And that's all thanks to this set of martial arts. Control Crane's 7 divine hands. A mysterious light flashed in Yi Zaiwen's eyes. He and Mu Xingjie would certainly have to fight one day. So, he wouldn't be caught off guard at that time if he would get to see this technique now, since this martial arts had been taught to this man by Mu Xingjie himself. Yi Shiwen felt that an incomparably powerful fluctuating power had emerged out of Do Hexing's body after he had used the Control Crane 7 Divine Hands technique. His terrifying vitality surged up, and the dreadful strength of the intermediate stage of the Sage Realm manifested. Yi Shiwen was wary in his heart. He must kill him on the spot and mustn't give him any opportunity to fight back. Otherwise, he might not be able to deal with the enemy's deep strength, even if he were to use the full extent of his semi-sage powers. He had cultivated his strength over the 100 years he wasn't in the true martial university. So, Yi Shiwen obviously didn't know his real fighting strength. Therefore, the only possibility would be to give up and get killed if Yi Shiwen allowed him to unleash the true extent of his powers. "Huh!" Yi Shiwen shouted and stretched out his hand. It transformed into a fire-colored cloud as it took the form of a big hand. It seemed as if his big hand would shake the heavens and break down the earth as it swept down from the sky. The fire cloud's falling sky hand would reach the level of perfection when used by Yi Shiwen. Consequently, this attack made the entire horizon collapse and left it to split open. Only red tracks were left in the vast sky. Rumble! 3 big hands collided in the sky. Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud's falling sky hand routed the offensive of the Control Crane's 7 divine hands at a lightning speed. In fact, the opponent's move collapsed at the very first encounter. Therefore, the clash didn't continue for too long. This had left everyone dumbstruck. How could the legendary Control Crane 7 divine hands be so weak? How is this possible? You're just a semi-sage realm expert. Nothing more. How can you be a match for me? Do Hexing couldn't believe this. It was simply unbelievable. Other people didn't know that he hadn't showed any leniency. In fact, he had gone all out. He had revealed the entire extent of his powers in order to kill Yi Shiwen. However, he hadn't thought that he still wouldn't be able to kill Yi Shiwen. On the contrary, his own offensive had been routed. What kind of technique is this? How it can be so ferocious? Do Hexing couldn't believe that Yi Shiwen had more strength than him. He was only a semi-sage expert. How he could contend against an expert of the intermediate stage of the Sage Realm. The only possible explanation was that it had happened because of the technique he had used. This is the fire cloud's falling sky hand. Someone on the other side recognized this technique. He knew that this was Fire Cloud's falling sky hand. This is Fire Cloud Cave's technique. You're a spy of the Fire Cloud Cave? It seemed as if Do Hexing had suddenly grabbed an opportunity to prove his point. You've dared to collaborate with the people of Fire Cloud Cave. You're courting death. Ha! You will die this time. Nobody can save you. Idiot. Can only the people of the Fire Cloud Cave have the Fire Cloud's falling sky hand? Yi Shiwen sneered in reply. It's impossible. Even the Fire Cloud's falling sky hand can't defeat the Control Crane 7 divine hands in this way. Someone still couldn't believe this. Senior Brother Mu had once crushed the body of a top heavens pride expert of the Fire Cloud Cave and had extinguished his soul with the help of the Control Crane 7 divine hands. It doesn't matter whether the technique is ferocious or not. Everything depends on the man who uses it. Yi Shiwen sneered. There were many techniques which didn't have any difference in their intensities. In fact, most of them were almost at the same level. It didn't matter whether it was ferocious or not. The most important factor was the person who was using them. There have been plenty of examples of this in the history. For example, Qiao Feng had used long-range punch and kicking style named long fist martial art to defeat countless heroes. Yi Shiwen was at such a state that he would be more powerful than Do Hexing even if his strength were to drop to its 1/10. However, that should have been an impossible scenario. After all, Yi Zaiwen's cultivation was only at the late stage of the semi-sage realm, but his fighting strength was enough to sweep away the experts of the intermediate stage of the sage realm. In fact, he could even contend against some of the weak experts of the late stage of the sage realm. This is impossible. Do Hexing couldn't believe this. The control crane, 7 divine hands swept down towards Yi Shiwen once again. I don't understand what you're so optimistic about. Bang! Yi Shiwen unleashed a backhand blow, and the fire cloud's falling sky hand attacked once again. The fire-colored big hand ripped apart Do Hexing's control crane's 7 divine hands and struck him on his body. Poof! Do Hexing felt that a heavy force had suddenly banged upon his body. In fact, this slap had broken down his defenses and had smashed against his body in a split second. He felt a strange taste in his mouth and suddenly spouted mouthful of blood. Crunch, crunch. It wasn't clear how many of his bones had been broken. In fact, it seemed as if the entirety of the bones in his body had been crushed by Yi Shiwen. Bang! His body crashed onto the ground on the metropolis single peak like a meteor, and a huge pit the size of his body had been formed in the ground as a result. He couldn't even move. Moreover, he soon came to realize that his cultivation had been destroyed. Slim-looking man. This was more severe than a death penalty. Death ends the entirety of one's troubles. He had lingered around life or death several times in his expedition of 100 years. So, death wasn't a big deal for him. However, he had now been tossed into a situation where he hadn't died, but hadn't been left to live either. He had become a cripple since his martial arts cultivation had been destroyed. And this feeling had left him so depressed that he wanted to die. How can this man be so ferocious? Senior Brother Do had followed Senior Brother Mu in the expedition to those ruins for many years. He possessed such high cultivation. However, he couldn't even resist one move from this guy. Isn't he just a new disciple of this session? How he can be so outrageously powerful. Someone who couldn't believe this exclaimed, "He has dared to destroy Senior Brother Do's martial arts cultivation. This man is extremely fierce. He is like an exceptionally ominous devil." Someone was left dumbstruck since he had witnessed that Yi Shiwen had destroyed Do Hexing's martial arts cultivation. They had obviously heard Yi Zaiwen's fierce name in the past. They had also heard that he had never had any trouble winning. However, Yi Shiwen had earned a fierce reputation among the younger generation. So, the seniors didn't care too much about that. They believed that the younger generation's disciples would need too much time to reach to their level. In fact, they felt that even the Heaven's Pride experts of the younger generation would need several decades for that. So, they obviously hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen would surpass their strength so quickly. They had obviously heard rumors about him, but they had believed them to be mere rumors, nothing more. So, they wouldn't have been shocked to such an extent if they hadn't seen it with their own eyes. The time duration for which the law enforcement had been regulating the true Martial University's punishment laws was unclear. They had already established supreme prestige among the ordinary disciples in the past. In fact, one would have to face a situation even worse than death if they dared to violate their rules or offended them. However, Yi Shiwen hadn't met an untimely death, even though he had dared to attack the law enforcement hall head-on. On the contrary, he had ultimately risen above the others and had become an extraordinary persona. Yi Shiwen grinned and revealed his white teeth. He was unaware how Mu Xingjie had come to know about him. However, he wasn't the type of person who'd just sit and wait for death when the opposite party had already made a move. To be continued. Chapter 492. Yi Shiwen wasn't the kind of person who would sit idle and wait for death. Nobody could make him resign to the fate. He hadn't been afraid of anyone since the time he had entered the true Martial University. Bullying the weak and fearing the strong was the common issue that everyone faced. The people of the law enforcement hall wanted to implicate him for restoring their prestige. It wasn't that he hadn't warned some of these people. He had warned some of these people to not mess with him. However, He didn't expect that he would end up attracting the attention of a figure like Mu Xingjie. One must know that Yi Shiwen just looked promising enough to enter the great sage realm in many people's opinion. However, Mu Xingjie had already entered the great sage realm, and only the real great sage experts had the authority to speak up in the true martial university. But this authority wasn't extended to those who had merely been labeled as geniuses by other people. In fact, this tag was pretty much worthless before the real deal. It wasn't clear how many geniuses were present in this world. Perhaps 100 million would be a good estimate. It couldn't be said that they looked like a group of ants gathered at one place. However, it was almost the same in reality. Geniuses of different ages and levels had gathered at one place. However, not even 1% of them could reach to the top. Large number of such geniuses used to arrive in the true martial university in every 100 years. Geniuses and so on were most valuable. However, they were also the most worthless at the same time. Yi Shiwen, how dare you? Do Hexing roared and glared at Yi Shiwen. However, he looked weak as he said this since he didn't have the strength to stand up again. His entire martial arts cultivation had been destroyed. What should I not dare? Don't forget that you were standing in my abode. And I remember, according to the regulations of the university, I won't be held responsible, even if I kill you, since you have arrived here in secrecy and without taking the permission of the real owner of this peak. Yi Shiwen grinned and revealed his white teeth. They were shining very radiantly in the sunlight. However, the courage of the disciples of the law enforcement hall had vanished as they heard Yi Ziwen's words. This splendid smile was similar to that of a devil's in their opinion. An expert of the intermediate stage of the sage realm, like Do Hexing, looked like a paper toy in front of him. In fact, he had fallen apart with just one poke. He was no match for Yi Shiwen. They recalled one such rule. However, it was them who had initially recalled this rule in order to find an excuse to kill Yi Shiwen. The Metropolis Single Peak was Do Hexing's domain in their opinion. So, they had a great opportunity to kill Yi Shiwen here. And those old fogies wouldn't be able to say anything even if they wanted to. However, they didn't expect that the situation would reverse. Those who had believed themselves to be predators in the beginning had become they preys at this time. And they were shivering in front of Yi Shiwen since they weren't a match for him. No, this is my abode. It seemed as if Do Hexing didn't wish to give up. He had become a crippled person since his martial arts cultivation had been destroyed. So, he might not be able to catch up with his past achievements, even if he would get the opportunity to restore his cultivation in the future. Even the safety of his life would be in danger in the future. It wasn't known how many people he had offended in the past. And he would now be even worse than rats for those old enemies without his martial arts cultivation if he were to face them again. So, they could easily crush him to death. Your abode? I don't know how this place has become your abode. Yi Shiwen sneered and said, You yourself can go and verify that this is my, Yi Ziwen's abode. The Supreme Lord himself has especially rewarded me this abode. This abode was expropriated by Senior Brother Mu, and he has given it to us as a reward. Do Hexing was burning with rage as he looked at Yi Shiwen. However, it was no longer a killer gaze as it used to be. Mu Xingjie, what does he think of himself? Does he consider himself as true martial university's Supreme Lord? Yi Shiwen laughed disdainfully. When did he gain the authority to have the final say? And you thought it's really yours because he said it's yours? He had thought about this point carefully, and this was where he was making sense in this matter. After all, the Supreme Lord had rewarded him this peak, and this man took it over because Mu Xingjie had said that he could have it? How this could be such a simple matter? Do Hexing became angry. Mu Xingjie was like a god to him. However, he was no better than dog shit in Yi Ziwen's opinion. So, Yi Ziwen's logical argument had touched a sore spot. He previously didn't care about Yi Shiwen. However, it wasn't because he considered that Mu Xingjie was superior to the Supreme Lord. He believed that Mu Xingjie must have his reasons since he had done so. Moreover, he believed that Mu Xingjie could take care of high-level matter as long as he could deal with Yi Shiwen when he would come back. And that's the end. However, he underestimated Yi Shiwen. After all, Yi Shiwen had arrived only 10 years ago, and he himself had arrived 100 years ago. So, there wasn't supposed to be any problem even if Yi Shiwen was this session's top Heaven's Pride expert. Therefore, he allowed Yi Shiwen to speak so long as he could defeat Yi Shiwen. Verbal attacks are powerless anyway. However, he hadn't thought that Yi Shiwen would be so terrifying that an expert of the intermediate stage of the Sage realm like him would appear like a paper toy in front of him, and would be defeated by him so quickly. He was the kind of person who was most proud of his own strength. However, he stood no chance in front of Yi Shiwen. This thing had hurt him the most. More and more disciples had gathered in the surroundings by now. The fight between Yi Shiwen and Do Hexing had extracted massive amounts of spirit energies from the surrounding area of over 50 kilometers radius. And this had alarmed many sage-level disciples who were undergoing closed-door training. An ordinary fight couldn't alarm these top-notch disciples of the true martial university. However, the sage-level fight between Yi Shiwen and Do Hexing had alarmed them. In fact, many powerful existences had also swept out their divine senses from the depths of the true martial university. This place was located in the depths of the true martial university, and many powerful existences were present in the depths at this time. So, they swept out their divine sense in quick succession to check. Isn't he Yi Shiwen? How this can be possible? Isn't that Do Hexing, who has recently arrived? How has he been beaten to such an extent that his martial arts cultivation has been destroyed? Has this Yi Shiwen actually done it just now? It's impossible. Do Hexing is a disciple of the previous session. And what is this Yi Shiwen? He is only a new disciple of this session. There is a difference of at least 100 years between them. However, this situation looks so. Leave the past. Yi Shiwen is the so-called Heaven's Pride expert. You think yourself. You yourself used to be a Heaven's Pride expert when you had arrived in that session back then. You are well aware that ordinary reasoning doesn't apply on the Heaven's Pride experts. However, why are they fighting each other? And Yi Shiwen has even resorted to such extreme methods. Isn't he afraid that he will be punished by the high-level experts? I think I know the reason. Yi Shiwen has won this time's martial arts competition among the four forces. He was supposedly rewarded with a floating peak abode. And this peak before our eyes must be that one. However, Mu Sheng-jie snatched it later. So, I reckon that this must be the reason behind this conflict. Again, it's Hidden Star Peak and Law Enforcement Hall. Can't they stay together? It seems that the senior disciples of the Hidden Star Peak and Law Enforcement Hall don't have friendly relations. What's strange in this? The Law Enforcement Hall regulates the punishment laws of our true martial university. However, their way of working is very high-handed and overbearing. Don't all of us dislike them? The Hidden Star Peak doesn't have too many disciples. However, all of them are incredible. Whether it's Huang Wuji or Yi Shiwen, each of them is cruel and untamed. How they will obey the Law Enforcement Hall. And this has resulted in a hostile situation between them. Yi Shiwen coldly looked at Do Hexing. He didn't launch another attack on him because they were in the true martial university. Otherwise, this man would have died at his hands by now. He then entered the metropolis single peak. This would be his abode in the future. This would be his lair. However, Yi Shiwen hadn't traveled too far inside the metropolis single peak when a rumbling sound suddenly reverberated, and it seemed as if he had triggered some matrix formation. Countless spirit energies present in the surroundings gathered up as a result, and they condensed at the center of the matrix formation and took a humanoid form. It turned out to be the form of a man. However, it wasn't clearly visible. A dreadful pressure emerged out of this man's body and swept towards Yi Shiwen to subjugate him. In fact, it seemed as if it would crush him in the very next moment. Yi Shiwen looked in the direction of that man. However, he could only see that man's ice-cold and ruthless eyes. He looked towards Yi Shiwen and said, "You're Yi Shiwen? Good. You're very courageous. You dared to barge into the abode of a core disciple. Do you know what kind of offense this is?" Offense? How would I know that returning to one's own home is an offense? Yi Shiwen sneered. His eyes had turned ice cold. He was staring back at that man who had a fuzzy appearance. I have given this peak to a disciple of our true martial university as a reward for doing great deeds for the university. And you have just won a martial arts competition. You don't deserve an abode. That man looked at Yi Shiwen and frowned as he spoke. Yi Shiwen finally guessed the identity of this man. His appearance wasn't clearly visible. However, he must be that Mu Xingjie. He possessed an incomparably formidable strength, and he must have laid down this matrix formation for the so-called future safety. Mu Xingjie, do you think that you're the Supreme Lord? Do you believe that whatever you say will become the law? You decided to give it to someone, and so it will happen? Yi Shiwen frowned. This Mu Xingjie was far more overbearing than what he had imagined. In fact, he was entirely different from a proud and aloof person like Huang Wuji. Both had risen to fame because of their own strength. However, their personas were entirely different. Huang Wuji was proud and aloof. He would often keep distance from the outsiders. However, he didn't dislike anyone. However, this Mu Xingjie was overbearing. Even the spectators disliked him. That's right. Whatever I say becomes the law. My word is the law in the true martial university. Yi Shiwen, you have committed many mistakes. You've killed the disciples of my law enforcement hall. I wasn't present at that time. However, I've caught you red-handed now. Mu Xingjie spoke up in a matter-of-fact manner, and he didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. You must surrender now. I know you are quite talented, so I can let you go if you hand over your treasures and destroy your own martial arts cultivation. This is the only way for you to survive. Good. It's a brilliant idea. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth in anger and replied, this thing would be even worse than death. You don't know how to appreciate a favor, Mu Xingjie shouted, and a big hand suddenly swept towards Yi Shiwen to grab him. To be continued. Chapter 493. Slaughtered. Saga Mu Xingjie stretched out his hand to grab Yi Shiwen. The land under Yi Shiwen's feet began to disintegrate under the terrifying pressure. In fact, cracks had begun to appear in the ground. It looked exceptionally terrifying. This was the same control Crane's 7 divine hands. However, it looked completely different in Mu Xingjie's hand as compared to what Do Hexing had displayed. In fact, these were two entirely different kinds of feelings. Even the disparity between them was very big. It didn't seem as if the unleashed power was from the same technique. In fact, there was a big disparity in every aspect, and it was simply beyond imagination. However, this didn't happen because there was disparity in the essence of the power technique. Do Hexing had practiced only a portion of this power technique. However, it couldn't be compared with Mu Xingjie's complete version of this power technique. And this disparity had basically occurred because of the difference in the martial power of both individuals. Only a wisp of Mu Xingjie's soul had incarnated here. Yes, that's right. Yi Shiwen had realized at a glance that it wasn't Mu Xingjie's actual body, but only a wisp of his soul. However, it was far more powerful than that Do Hexing, even if it was only a wisp of his soul. The dreadful strength of Mu Xingjie's real body was hard to imagine. Yi Shiwen's hands suddenly emitted golden lights. They then transformed into falling sky hand and swept out to grab. He was merely facing a wisp of Mu Xingjie's soul. However, he still didn't dare to underestimate him, and used his entire strength from the get-go. Bang! The two big hands collided in the sky. The space collapsed along with the mutual annihilation of the two hands. Both of them seemed to be evenly matched. Mu Xingjie saw that Yi Shiwen was able to resist his attack. You don't know how to appreciate favors. I had decided to give you a way out. However, I didn't expect that you would be so arrogant. I will have to protect the sovereignty of my true martial university's legislation now, and I will have to execute you on the spot. Mu Xingjie coldly said, do you consider yourself a god that whatever you say will become a law? Yi Shiwen laughed in a taunting manner. This is only a wisp of your soul, nothing more. I wouldn't have surrendered even if your entire figure were to be present here, let alone such an insignificant wisp of soul. Then you must die. Whoever dares to challenge the law enforcement hall's people must die. You aren't an exception either. Mu Xingjie sneered. He again attacked Yishuan. His body emitted even brighter rays of light than before, and it obscured half of the sky in a split second. A big hand suddenly swept out from these endless rays of light, and the entire sky began to disintegrate as the big hand swept out. Yishuan repeatedly shot his fire clouds falling sky hand and weaved a huge fiery red net in the sky. Consequently, the incoming attacks were blocked even before they could reach him. This is the fire cloud's falling sky hand. It belongs to the southern barbarian people of the Fire Cloud Cave. This secret technique is known only to the people of the Fire Cloud Cave. You are a spy of the Fire Cloud Cave. You must be killed this instant. I'm sure that those old fogies will have nothing to say in this case. Mu Xingjie sneered. He had finally gotten hold of Yishuan's weak point. What a joke! Can only a spy of the Fire Cloud Cave obtain Fire Cloud's falling sky hand? I can see that you have also learnt this control Crane's 7 divine hands from an unknown source. So, you must be a spy of some other sect as well. Yishuan replied. He could also use such scheme. However, he still felt that it was beneath his dignity to use such dirty tricks. You have a razor-sharp mouth. It's not surprising that you fooled those old-timers. However, it's useless in front of me. You must die today. The killing intention had become even stronger in Mu Xingjie's eyes. Yishuan had practiced the fire cloud's falling sky hand to such an extent that it was enough to guess how talented he was. He didn't believe that Yishuan was a spy. However, he needed an excuse. The more outstanding Yishuan's performance was, the stronger his killing intention would become. And it had soon reached an extent where it seemed like he would kill Yishuan. Mu Xingjie didn't wish to talk nonsense with Yishuan any further. The control Crane's 7 divine hands technique was simple. However, it was mixed with a special core cultivation method, and it unleashed such might in Mu Xingjie's hand that it could destroy the heaven and extinguish the earth. It seemed as if the sky would be annihilated every time he attacked. His mediocre-looking moves contained endless murderous aura. Every move was a manifestation of the extremity and truth of the main Tao principle. Yishuan wasn't going to be outdone either. The control Crane's 7 divine hands was exceptional. However, he had also practiced the fire cloud's falling hand to perfection. This technique was once founded by the barbarian god, and it had regained its glorious might in Yishuan's hand. So, his attacks weren't yielding to those of Mu Xingjie's. Yishuan, you're not fast enough. Mu Xingjie shouted while facing Yishuan's attack. You won't get a chance to run away once my real body appears. Real body? Ha ha ha. Your real body will appear? Say that again when it appears. Yishuan burst into laughter as he replied. He was certain that Mu Xingjie's real body couldn't move into action. Otherwise, he would be accused for bullying the weak. Perhaps Yishuan wouldn't be taking it so lightly if Mu Xingjie had threatened him earlier. However, the situation was different now. Yishuan had displayed enough talent. Perhaps this fight had already alarmed the high-level experts. So, it would be strange if his real body were to move into action now. Good, very good. It seemed as if one could see the real Mu Xingjie gnashing his teeth in extreme anger. It was clearly visible that he was extremely angry. Many spectators gasped in amazement since they hadn't thought that they would see such a scene. Mu Xingjie is very angry right now. He has attacked personally. However, he still can't get hold of a new disciple like Yishuan. Yeah, it's merely a wisp of Mu Xingjie's soul, but its strength is enough to sweep away the experts of the intermediate stage of the Sage Realm. However, it looks useless in front of Yishuan. It doesn't have any way to get a complete hold of him. Yeah, even a wisp of Mu Xingjie's soul should be extremely dreadful considering his strength. Moreover, he has returned from the ancient ruins and has obtained enormous benefits. He's undergoing closed-door training at present. He must have thought that only a wisp of his soul would be enough to handle this matter. However, it now seems that he was overconfident, that Yishuan is the genuinely dreadful person. That is Mu Xingjie's soul we are talking about. It has to be extremely dreadful even if it's a wisp of his soul. We can't dare to say that we can prevail over his soul. However, Yi Shiwen is facing it head-on. Moreover, he hasn't fallen into a disadvantageous situation yet. He is extremely dreadful. I don't know how Yi Shiwen has learnt the fire cloud's falling sky hand, but he has learned it to such a profound level that even the Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave will be surprised if he sees this. These two individuals are undisciplined and out of control, especially Mu Xingjie. Even the elders of the Great Sage Realm don't dare to interfere into his matters. He holds the control power of the Law Enforcement Hall in his hands. How can some ordinary elder be a match for him? Mu Xingjie looked at Yi Shiwen with his ice-cold eyes. He was standing firmly in the dome of heaven. He was looking like a god, and he was staring at Yi Shiwen with his ice-cold and ruthless eyes. His murderous aura seemed boundless. You have talent, so I had offered you a chance to redeem your crime as long as your martial arts cultivation was destroyed. However, you won't be able to make up for your crime even if you die 100 times now. Mu Xingjie solemnly spoke up. You talk too much. Yi Shiwen suddenly trod forward at an incredible pace. His entire body transformed into golden light, and he disappeared without any trace. Then, he appeared right in front of Mu Xingjie the very next moment. Yi Shiwen hadn't used his entire power. In fact, he had retained some of his power, just in case. However, his current power was already very dreadful. His gilded tyrant form was particularly intrepid. The power technique of this sect had laid down the foundation of his body. A fist attack with full concentration could reverse the flow of a river. Yi Shiwen didn't feel the need to use his entire strength while facing an expert like Mu Xingjie. He might say that he was quite relaxed. However, he was incomparably afraid in his heart. He didn't dare to relax even if only a wisp of Mu Xingjie's soul had condensed up. However, Yi Shiwen was also confident that only a wisp of that man's soul had reincarnated. So, it would definitely sustain serious injuries even if it didn't die once it came under his fist. Mu Xingjie was still calm and composed. He suddenly used the control Crane's 7 divine hand, and a big hand swept towards Yi Shiwen to catch him. It transformed into an offensive that covered the entire sky. Yi Shiwen also made the counterattack. Yi Shiwen was well experienced. It wasn't clear how many times he had made a narrow escape. However, Mu Xingjie didn't have less fighting experience than Yi Shiwen. So, they had almost immediately found out each other's limits. An iron sword appeared in Yi Shiwen's hand in a split second, and an astonishing sword intention surged up. Yi Shiwen used the buried heaven sword, and it suddenly cut open the control Crane 7 divine hands and went towards Mu Xingjie to chop him. Mu Xingjie promptly retreated in order to avoid Yi Shiwen's iron sword attack. Yi Shiwen had learnt a myriad of martial arts techniques, and he had already reached perfection in planning the next move in advance. Therefore, no matter whether it was the fire cloud's falling sky hand or the buried sword secret, they displayed enormous might in his hand. Moreover, he had grasped all of them with his fingertips, so he could use them effortlessly. How is it possible? Yi Shiwen has forced Mu Xingjie to retreat. In fact, he has almost been cornered by Yi Shiwen. Am I making a mistake? Or are my eyes not working properly? Someone couldn't believe as they saw this scene and exclaimed. All of them were Sage Realm disciples as well. However, they were still left dumbstruck as they saw this scene. And they started to doubt their interpretation of this scene after they watched it unfold. Nobody has ever caused so much trouble for me. Yi Shiwen, you are the first person to do so. Mu Xingjie had been forced to retreat by Yi Shiwen. However, his face was still exposing a cruel expression. It seemed as if being forced into the disadvantageous situation by Yi Shiwen was ordinary for him. However, Yi Shiwen also knew that this was only a wisp of his soul, nothing more. So, he didn't care about it much. He may manage to prevail over Mu Xingjie, but he would only do so over a wisp of his soul. It was nothing. In fact, it might not even have 1/1000th the strength of his real body. Shouldn't I feel proud? Yishuan laughed out loud at first. He then said, "You must die." One sword had forced Mu Sheng-jie to retreat 100 steps. However, Mu Sheng-jie still couldn't find a foothold. He was surprised to find that the surroundings had already sunk into a universe. Moreover, an enormous star had already pounded upon him along with Yi Shiwen's fist. Rumble! Yi Shiwen shot his Big Bang Stardust fist, and it crushed Mu Sheng-jie. Bang! Mu Sheng-jie's body had been condensed by a wisp of his soul. How could it resist Yi Shiwen's sudden bombardments? It suddenly transformed into endless spirit energies. To be continued. Chapter 494. Yi Shiwen crushed Mu Sheng-jie's body that had been formed from a wisp of his soul. He then grabbed that wisp of his soul in his hand. Yi Shiwen, you mustn't feel too pleased with yourself. You will die when my real body comes out of the closed-door training. Mu Sheng-jie's voice was still ice-cold. Whom do you want to kill? What do you think you are? Yi Shiwen disdainfully laughed. Mu Sheng-jie was very violent, cruel, and untamed. In fact, he had reached an extent where it was quite difficult to describe him. He considered everyone beneath him, or it could be said that he had too much confidence in himself. He had dared to overrule the Supreme Lord's decision. It was merely a small matter. However, it was evident that Mu Sheng-jie was arrogant and despotic. This was also the reason why the high-level experts used to tolerate him. Yi Shiwen also enjoyed high-level experts' tolerance like he did, since the high-level experts attached great importance to these geniuses. A genius had always been placed above 1,000 mediocre individuals since the beginning. Any sect must look at the performances of these geniuses in order to flourish over time. The mediocre people were useless to them. This was the reason why the high-level experts didn't say anything on this fight between these two individuals. Otherwise, any other person in their place would have been arrested by the people of the law enforcement hall by now. You can be pleased with yourself for now. But you will die when the next competition between the Sage Realm disciples takes place. Mu Sheng-jie spoke up in his usual ice-cold voice. You talk too much. Yi Shiwen crushed that wisp of Mu Sheng-jie's soul, and it dissipated. It was merely a wisp of his soul. However, it contained a lot of information, including some secrets of the Control Crane 7 Divine Hands. Yi Shiwen brought his mysterious space into play and began to analyze the secrets of this Control Crane 7 Divine Hands. Meanwhile, his hands slowly started to perform some styles of the Control Crane 7 Divine Hands. The more and more adept he became in this new technique, the cleaner his movements started to become. Many spectators felt that they had seen a ghost when they saw this scene. In fact, they were even more shocked as compared to when Mu Sheng-jie was defeated. After all, only a wisp of Mu Sheng-jie's soul had been present here. However, Yi Shiwen had quickly learned to control Crane's 7 Divine Hands and had adopted its movements. This was far beyond their imagination. Such an exaggeration shouldn't have been possible even if he possessed a very sharp memory. They were unaware that Yi Shiwen could grasp the essence of any technique as long as he had enough spirit energies and an accurate method of cultivation. However, Yi Shiwen had learned too many secret techniques by now, so he only learned a little bit of this technique. And he stopped after he had learned some of the key strength and weak points of this technique. He had done this since a conflict might break out between him and Mu Sheng-jie in the future. It was said that this Control Crane 7 Divine Hands was Mu Sheng-jie's special skill. Therefore, Yi Shiwen needed to examine it to some extent. This was the so-called know thyself and your enemy in order to win every fight. However, Yi Shiwen didn't relax after he crushed Mu Sheng-jie's soul, because Mu Sheng-jie had spoken about the Sage Disciples competition before he had disappeared. There were many competitions for the disciples of different ranks in the True Martial University, and this time's competition was the biggest official competition among the core disciples. And most importantly, every sage-level disciple of each big force of the entire true martial world would gather in this competition. Moreover, the venue of this competition was located in the Devil World. Every big force would join hands to open the passage that would lead to the devil world once the competition would start. And a large number of sage disciples would go in. The more devils they would kill, the more their scores would increase. And the one who would obtain the highest score would become the champion. This was also true martial world's method of opposing and controlling devil world's invasion. They used to organize such competitions at regular intervals so that a large group of experts could venture into the devil world and cause wanton destruction there. This would consequently delay devil race's next invasion of the true martial world. The conflagration of war would spread inside the devil world and would burn it from within. It was useless to enter the devil world if one possessed weak strength. They would get killed rather quickly. However, the devil world might quickly find out if great sage experts entered in such big numbers. And the true martial university's people might have to face the siege of countless devil experts in that case. The great sage experts would also take part in such competitions. However, their numbers wouldn't be so large. One would become elite among elites if they could manage to endure the conflagration of war of the devil world and come out of it alive. Yi Shiwen could only contend against some weak experts of the late stage of the sage realm, at the most as per his current strength. However, he must think to rise above others at that place. In fact, survival wasn't guaranteed inside the devil world, even if one were to be an expert of the late stage of the sage realm. The disciples of the Law Enforcement Hall could be found everywhere in the entire true martial university. In fact, many experts among the sage-level disciples belong to the Law Enforcement Hall. And many such experts would be directed against Yi Shiwen in this time's competition since Mu Xingjie had said so. However, there were still 10 years left for the competition to start. So, he had the time to improve himself. He must at least have the power to defend himself. Yi Shiwen went inside the palace of the metropolis Single Peak after he had tossed these matters out of his mind. The control of this floating peak abode was in his hands now. Those spectators were left dumbstruck as they saw Yi Ziwen's figure gradually disappear before their eyes, especially those people who were aware about the ins and outs of this entire matter. They couldn't help but be stunned by these two undisciplined and untamed guys. It was well known that Mu Xingjie considered everyone beneath him. He didn't even care about the Supreme Lord's reputation. The Supreme Lord had set this floating peak aside for Yi Shiwen. However, he had still dared to say that he would take it away, and he did exactly so. It wasn't a big matter for the Supreme Lord. However, Mu Xingjie's arrogance could be seen from this action. However, Yi Ziwen's incomparable tyranny wasn't any less in comparison to Mu Xingjie's arrogance. Most people wouldn't dare to oppose Mu Xingjie after they'd hear about his glorious past. In fact, most great sage-level elders didn't dare to interfere in his matters. So, it was evident that his fierce name had flourished everywhere. However, Yi Shiwen had still arrived here and challenged him. He had disregarded what Mu Xingjie's soul had said, and he had even destroyed that wisp of his soul. He didn't even seem afraid of the consequences. Yi Shiwen was undoubtedly an undisciplined and untamed man. Some old fogies had been observing this from the mystical depths of the true martial university in secrecy, and they couldn't help but recall the past image of Huang Wuji's. It seemed to them that Yi Shiwen was an undisciplined and untamed individual. Huang Wuji couldn't endure any injustice either, but he had been outside for a long time and hadn't caused much trouble as a result. However, he had made earth-shaking ruckus when he had returned the last time. He had even rushed to the War Dead Star Peak and had chased their leader until he had nowhere to run to. He wasn't some law-abiding citizen, and many people saw Yi Shiwen and felt that he looked similar to Huang Wuji of the past. The news that Yi Shiwen had defeated Mu Xingjie's soul had spread quickly throughout the entire true martial university, and the entire university had begun to bustle with noise because of this. Both involved individuals were a kind of person whom nobody would dare to approach. Yi Shiwen had recently won the martial arts competition that had taken place between the four forces. So, it could be said that his incredible strength had come into the limelight. Moreover, he had also gained the attention of the high-level experts, and everyone had reckoned that he would most likely become a senior great sage expert in the future. However, Mu Sheng-jie was an even more outstanding character. He had become famous in the entire true martial university many years ago. And most importantly, he had just returned after establishing great service for the university. So, he had also gained praises from many high-level experts. Yi Shiwen had returned a very short while ago, so his strength was yet to come into the limelight again after the collision between these two men. It should be mentioned that no one had expected that he would dare to go out and look for trouble. This conflict between Yi Shiwen and Mu Xingjie had once again instigated the conflict between the Hidden Star Peak and the Law Enforcement Hall. It had now become the keenest struggle ever. Many people still had the memories of it. It seemed as if this conflict had begun a long time ago. The Hidden Star Peak and the Law Enforcement Hall had never had friendly relations. And two top Heaven's Pride experts like Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie had amplified the memory of this conflict in the minds of people. However, Yi Ziwen's arrival had again highlighted the conflict between the two forces that had begun to quiet down a bit of late. There were two basic points of conflict in this matter. The Law Enforcement Hall wanted to manage everything. First, they had a habit of poking their nose in everything. Secondly, they wanted everything under their control. However, everyone in the Hidden Star Peak disliked and criticized their habit of poking their nose. And this was the triggering factor that had laid down the foundation of this conflict. Everyone was watching. An even bigger conflict might break out between both sides in the future, and both sides might go all out against each other. Everyone knew that the Law Enforcement Hall was a powerful institution. In fact, only a few institutions in the entire true martial university were at par with them. Moreover, they had a huge number of experts. However, the Hidden Star Peak only had a few people. But each of them was ferocious. There were 7 individuals altogether, and 4 of them were powerful great sage-level senior experts. The remaining 3 were the senior experts of the sage realm. This strength might not rank them among the top 10 inheritances. However, it was enough to rank them at the forefront of the top 100 inheritances. Huang Wuji had single-handedly made a huge ruckus in the entire War Dead Star Peak. So, people didn't dare to look down upon the Hidden Star Peak because of Huang Wuji's strength. In addition, Yi Ziwen's outstanding performance in the Four Forces martial arts competition had also made everyone aware of the fact that the Hidden Star Peak couldn't be underestimated, even though they had a very few disciples in their ranks. Many people wanted to see the collision between two forces in which one was extremely powerful, and the other had few disciples, but was high-handed. Those people who couldn't deal with the Hidden Star Peak, or those who considered the Law Enforcement Hall as an eyesore, were particularly keen to see this happen. They hoped for a big fight to break out between the two sides, and they wanted the results to be disastrous. In fact, it would be best if both sides suffered a loss. However, both the sides concerned had strangely maintained silence in this regard. In fact, it seemed as if they hadn't paid any attention to this matter. The outside world was bustling with excitement. However, Yi Shiwen himself felt as if nothing had happened. He went straight to the Merit Palace Hall. Yi Shiwen had barely entered the Merit Palace Hall, but he had already attracted the attention of countless people. His popularity had increased enormously since he had been a part of so many matters. He didn't hide his cultivation this time. He had messed with the people of the Law Enforcement Hall and had still dared to come out and run all over the places. Such courage couldn't be regarded as small. Yi Shiwen didn't pay attention to the astonished gazes of the people who were present in the surroundings. And he approached the disciple who was present at the front desk of the Merit Palace Hall. He then said, "Help me in finding out the medicinal ingredients that have been mentioned in this list. Which ones among these can be redeemed with the points I have accumulated? And which ones do I need to purchase?" The materials required for the Break Sage Yellow Pill were listed in this list of items. However, he had also made sure that the people of the True Martial University couldn't get through the materials which were mentioned in his list of items and guess which immortality pill he wanted to refine. In fact, he had listed many insignificant and unnecessary drug ingredients for safety. Moreover, some drug ingredients with completely opposite effects were also mentioned in this list. So, it would be deadly if someone were to get hold of this list of items and attempted to refine the pill. Yi Shiwen heard a faint shout in his ears. To be continued. Chapter 495. Yi Shiwen heard a faint shout. The sound of footsteps came from the gate of the Merit Palace Hall, along with a cold shout. It was a man of approximately 27 or 28 years of age. He was clad in a white robe. His physique appeared tall and slim. It seemed as if his face had been carved with a knife. His handsome face was as cold as frost. He strode in and ran his eyes over the place, and eventually shot a glance at Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's entire body tightened up. He could feel that this man's aura contained the ferocity of a wild beast. And it also carried a faint murderous aura. It seemed as if he had experienced too many battles, same as Do Hexing, since it was seemingly difficult for him to conceal his killing intention. Who's this man? He has such a great murderous aura. Someone asked. Don't you know him? Ah? He's been out of the big limelight these days. He's a great disciple of the law enforcement hall. Mu Xingjie is very proud of this subordinate of his. He's Chao Yuyu. It's said that his strength has already reached the perfection level of the Sage Realm. He is about to enter the half-step Great Sage Realm. He's a rare young talent who has emerged out in the recent years. Yeah, I've also heard about him. He had gone on that expedition with Mu Xingjie for 100 years. He has an illustrious fame to his name. He's quite famous in the true martial university. All the young core disciples of the law enforcement hall follow his commands. Mu Xingjie attaches a lot of importance to him. But why he has arrived here? Is he going to start a fight with Yi Shiwen? Someone asked in a doubtful manner. It would appear as bullying if he were to attack Yi Shiwen at this time. After all, he had cultivated for so many years, and Yi Shiwen had practiced for many years lesser. So, he would be breaking the rules if he were to attack Yi Shiwen regardless of his status. And this act of bullying would provoke Huang Wuji and the Hidden Star Peak. Then, they would have no scope for excuses. Unless there was a valid reason. A fight between two individuals of the same generation was passable by the law enforcement hall, even if it was based on some arbitrary reason. Are you Yi Shiwen? Chao Yu looked at Yi Shiwen. His ice-cold vision didn't have the slightest of fluctuations. It seemed as if he was looking at a dead person. You're quite audacious. I've seen many daring people whose attempts to provoke our law enforcement hall's prestige have gone in vain. And all of them are dead now. I've also seen many people who wanted to crush me in order to establish their prestige. All of them wanted to kill me, but they are also dead now. Yi Shiwen grinned and revealed his white teeth. His face exposed a slightly genial smile. However, his words didn't show the slightest sign of weakness. A fierce light flashed in Chao Yuyu's eyes as he heard these words. He didn't conceal his killing intention and swept it out towards Yi Shiwen. However, he was surprised to see that Yi Shiwen didn't budge. In fact, he remained motionless. Moreover, Yi Shiwen didn't seem the least bit suppressed. Many people who were present in the surroundings could feel this killing intention and had goosebumps because of it. In fact, they had retreated several steps in order to avoid the rage of this killing intention. However, it seemed as if Yi Shiwen wasn't feeling anything. He looked unaffected in his entirety, and this had stunned everyone. They now admired Yi Shiwen even more than they used to. No wonder he has dared to mess with the people of the law enforcement hall. He's no weakling who would crumble at the first blow. However, they were unaware that Yi Shiwen was using his divinities to protect his body. So, it could be said that pressure that was put upon him felt no different to him than a burst of cold breeze upon his face. It had no effect on him. After all, God is the most powerful entity in the entire world. The invincible might of gods was like a prison. No suppression or imposing aura was going to work in the face of God's power. In fact, any attempts would be a joke, since such influences were worthless before divinities. An astonished look flashed in Chao Yuyu's eyes when he saw that Yi Shiwen wasn't affected, and wasn't in any pain either. He said, "Very good. It's not surprising that you dared to oppose our law enforcement haul. However, you are gravely mistaken if you think that you can get away by depending on your clever little tricks and schemes." Yi Shiwen merely shook his head and burst into laughter. "What are you laughing at?" Chao Yu frowned and shouted, "I'm laughing at you for being too outrageous. It seems that you believe every matter to be a provocation to your prestige." Yi Shiwen replied in a casual manner, "Mu Sheng-jie has so much importance in your eyes. It seems as if you take him to be some god. However, he's worthless in my opinion. I would have killed him by now if we were to be at the same level. In fact, killing him wouldn't have been any more difficult than killing an ant by trampling it in that case." The crowd went in an uproar. Mu Xingjie had been famous for so many years. His power had shaken the true martial university. He was an extremely illustrious expert in the entire true martial university. He was a super expert who had a promising future and might even obtain the next Supreme Lord's position in the future. However, he was worthless in Yi Zaiwen's opinion. Words are as light as a feather. However, these words had smashed down like a sudden clap of thunder. Killing Mu Xingjie is like killing an ant. Who could have dared to say such a thing? Could Huang Wuji have dared to say this? He certainly wouldn't have dared to say this. It didn't matter how prideful Huang Wuji was. He wouldn't have spoken these words. He was very proud and aloof. But saying such words would have been beneath his dignity, because one would only feel embarrassment after they had spoken such words. However, Yi Shiwen was different. Many people reacted at this. Yi Zaiwen's fighting strength wasn't bad compared to that of other Heaven's Pride experts. However, his cultivation hadn't been making quick progress since the beginning. He had only reached the late stage of the semi-sage realm so far. In other words, he was merely at the level where other Heaven's Pride experts used to be several years ago. And this was a few years ago. A few years' time was enough for the fighting strength of the Heaven's Pride experts to make a qualitative breakthrough. However, Yi Shiwen had managed to beat those other Heaven's Pride experts a few years ago. What did this show? This showed that Yi Shiwen had risen above the rank of a Heaven's Pride expert through his unusual cultivation. Countless people were left in shock after they thought along these lines. They hadn't previously thought that this could be the possibility. Perhaps it could be said that many people had been deceived by Yi Zaiwen's fighting strength. So, they hadn't thought this. Yi Shiwen could fight with those Heaven's Pride experts when his realm was lower to that of theirs. So, what would happen when his realm would rise? I would have killed him like an ant if we were to be at the same level. Such words weren't empty in this case. Rather, it was an achievable fact. Everyone's way of looking at Yi Shiwen suddenly saw a drastic change. Chao Yu was merely staring at Yi Shiwen with his ice-cold eyes. The killing intention in his eyes had become even stronger. Mu Sheng-jie was like a god to him, and Yi Shiwen had used bad words to insult his god. This had made it difficult for him to control his murderous aura. Yi Shiwen didn't care, since Chao Yu's murderous aura wasn't affecting him in the slightest. So, he obviously didn't pay attention to it. Yi Shiwen knew that Mu Sheng-jie was determined to kill him. So, there was no room for leniency. Anyway, it wasn't as if Yi Shiwen would have said some pleasant words for the sake of leniency. Yi Shiwen, you should be glad. Seeing your brother Mu has allowed you to live till the big competition between the Sage Realm disciples. However, that lease on your life is only valid till that time. Chao Yu sneered. He suddenly raised his arm and wrote down a declaration of war in midair. It took the shape of a declaration of war talisman and swept down towards Yi Shiwen. This talisman carried unmatched power as it suddenly pressed down upon Yi Shiwen. It then transformed into a huge steel and swept down towards Yi Shiwen to suppress him. Yi Shiwen felt that a dreadful pressure had tightly locked onto his body, and he couldn't budge as a result. Chao Yu was also a former Heaven's Pride expert, so he was far ahead of Yi Shiwen in every aspect. Moreover, the steel had nearly broken the void as it pressed down. Die here if you can't even accept my declaration of war. Yi Shiwen heard Chao Yu's cold shout. However, he didn't put much effort in thinking at this time. The golden divinities suddenly crawled over his entire body, and it started to seem as if he had put on a golden divine cloak. People exclaimed as they saw Yi Zaiwen's peak fighting strength. Qiao Yiyu had merely written a war declaration. However, it had forced Yi Shiwen to use his entire strength. Yi Shiwen genuinely lacked in front of him at present. Yi Shiwen was an outstanding genius. However, Qiao Yiyu was also a Heaven's Pride expert of his generation. Moreover, he had cultivated for several hundred years more than Yi Shiwen. So, Yi Shiwen was very far behind. In fact, his cultivation hadn't even entered the sage realm. But the opposite party was already at the perfection level of the sage realm. Huh! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. His energy surged up and formed a pillar that soared straight into the sky. He took a step, and his entire body transformed into a universe. He was the only god in this universe. One fist suddenly swept out. It transformed into a huge star and began to rotate at a very fast speed. It then went up to face that steel. Rumble! The steel and the huge star suddenly collided. The space collapsed and chaos flushed in. It seemed as if the world had turned upside down. The sky began to shake, and a dreadful power recklessly swept out, rotating in the sky. The shocked waves swept across and destroyed Yi Zaiwen's star. It seemed that this force would sweep away the Merit Palace Hall. However, an overwhelming power unexpectedly appeared when this power had swept out. This newly appeared power crushed this force and extinguished it. This was Merit Palace Hall's own power. Yi Zaiwen's face was covered with golden divinities, but it had turned very red. The blow from that dreadful force had obviously left his blood and energy to boil and roll over. The stone floor under his feet had transformed into fine powder by now. It had been crushed by that tremendous power. It's only a written declaration of war. There was no need to make it so fancy. Yi Shiwen suppressed his surging vitalities and grinned. The Phoenix regeneration technique began to operate crazily in order to repair his injuries. He hadn't been injured to such an extent since a long time. So, he hadn't needed to use the Phoenix regeneration technique to such an extent in a while. Qiao Yiyu genuinely hadn't restrained his strength. It was difficult for Qiao Yiyu to conceal that astonished look in his eyes when he saw that Yi Shiwen had suppressed his surging vitalities within the blink of an eye. He knew that he hadn't used his entire strength in this move. However, he had still done it with the idea to suppress Yi Shiwen to death on the spot. In fact, he wouldn't have complained even if he were to be punished as long as he could accomplish that. This kind of attack would have easily suppressed an ordinary sage expert to death. And an expert at the perfection level of the sage realm would have sustained injuries under such attack. However, Yi Shiwen had withstood that attack. Moreover, he hadn't died. It seems like the rumors that this boy possesses an extremely tyrannical body aren't baseless. Enjoy the remaining few years of your life properly. Qiao Yu said this at first. Then, he turned around and left the Merit Palace Hall. To be continued. Chapter 496. The news that Qiao Yiyu had handed down a declaration of war to Yi Shiwen had quickly spread throughout the entire True Martial University, and it had added fuel to the enmity between the Hidden Star Peak and the Law Enforcement Hall. It wasn't set to happen very soon, but a time span of 10 years was nothing for these experts since they had extremely long lifespans. It should be mentioned that this wasn't a clash between the experts of the same rank. Moreover, many people recalled that Yi Shiwen had entered the True Martial University only 10 years ago, and not much time had passed since he had entered the legendary realm. However, he had already surpassed those Heaven's Pride experts in these 10 years. And this was an incredibly fast speed. God knows the extent he would grow up to after 10 years. In fact, it was possible that he might even obtain the strength to contend against Qiao Yiyu. Yi Shiwen was somewhat depressed in regards to this. However, he didn't say anything. He didn't say that he had agreed to the competition either. However, it seemed as if everyone had already approved of this competition, and they simply didn't care what Yi Zaiwen's opinion was. Could Yi Shiwen refuse in their opinion? Certainly not. After all, Yi Shiwen had earned a huge reputation. Wouldn't it be equal to losing face in the true martial university if he refused at this juncture? Yi Shiwen remained silent on this matter. How much money was a thing like reputation was worth? One might lose their life for it, and it would still amount to nothing. The reason why he didn't refuse was that he also felt that no one knew what would happen after 10 years. He obviously didn't know how far he would have cultivated by then. The most important thing was to arrange the materials required for refining the break sage yellow pill. He didn't have much experience regarding this. However, he knew that it was impossible for an alchemy master to collect the materials required for refining the break sage yellow pill without having the support of a big force. The reason wasn't money. Yi Shiwen had ample wealth at present. In fact, he had more than enough wealth to refine an immortality pill of this grade. And this was considering the situation in which his mysterious space and he himself would also be consuming the primary spirit dawn for cultivation. However, there were many real problems. For example, this pill required many herbs which weren't common. In fact, many of them were simply unheard of. Moreover, there was a requirement of many rare and heavenly treasures as well. It was impossible for a random cultivator with no background to obtain these things. Only the treasure house of a big force could possibly have such things. A random cultivator with no background aiming to become a powerful alchemy master was a myth. Even those extremely rare pill-making methods which Yi Shiwen knew were also useless if he didn't have the required materials at hand. He knew that the great alchemy masters who had left behind these incredible alchemy scriptures weren't the high-level experts of some big force, nor they had established some colossus forces that were spread across countless domains. They had only focused on collecting a myriad of materials in order to ensure that they had the materials required for their alchemic practices. Therefore, the alchemy masters who were random cultivators would perennially be seen wandering in deep mountains and old forests, since they'd always be on the lookout for heavenly treasures and herbs. Yi Ziwen's list of drug ingredients had gradually begun to fill up since he could rely on the backing of a force like the true martial university. However, he soon realized that his accumulated points had gradually become insufficient. Yi Shiwen had been gone for a long time, and he hadn't gone on many assignments of late as a result, and thus he hadn't obtained many points of late. In fact, he had only gained points by winning the Four Forces martial arts competition in recent times. However, these points weren't enough for Yi Shiwen because his list of items contained many drug ingredients, and all of them were very precious. Moreover, there were some ingredients that weren't regarded as precious, but they were still very rare. Therefore, he needed a bountiful of accumulated points in order to obtain them all. However, the Northern Dipper organization would also send him some tasks every now and then. The Northern Dipper organization was huge, and it had a broad area of operations. In fact, its area of operation wasn't limited to the true martial world alone. Northern Dipper organization didn't prohibit its members from receiving tasks. One could receive a wide range of tasks as long as they could afford to handle them. The Northern Dipper organization didn't have many people in its ranks. However, each of them was elite, and their sources of information were beyond the imagination of an ordinary person. However, he hadn't gotten any news from the Northern Dipper organization thus far. So, he didn't have any choice but to start earning points after he had obtained more than half of the drug ingredients in the true martial university. An astonishing amount of materials are required to refine the break sage yellow pill. However, it wouldn't have been able to help a person in making the breakthrough to the sage realm if it didn't require such a huge amount of materials. Yi Shiwen thought. He hadn't heard of a pill in the true martial university which could help a person in making the breakthrough into the sage realm. Sage experts were considered top-notch experts in the true martial university's main force. Only a few could get an opportunity to surpass the sage experts. The great sage experts were like the pillars of the university, and all of them were regarded as chief cultivators of the top 100 inheritances. Those masses of semi-sage experts would have also made the breakthrough into the sage realm if such a pill existed. And true martial university's strength would have consequently seen a qualitative promotion within a short time. I can only go on assignments and earn points. Then I can get those herbs in exchange. Yi Xuan thought. He could only think of this method at this time. He could have certainly exchanged the primary spirit dawn for the amount of points that he needed. However, it wasn't a good deal since he didn't have enough primary spirit dawn for himself. So, how could he have exchanged it for the points? The current Yi Xuan couldn't be compared with the old one who used to frantically take on missions. He used to be a very insignificant legendary expert back then. So, he could only receive a limited number of tasks. However, his realm had reached the late stage of the semi-sage realm now. Moreover, his fighting strength was enough to sweep away the experts of the intermediate stage of the sage realm. It was like the difference between the heaven and the earth. Time passed day by day after Chao Yiyu had unexpectedly issued that declaration of war against Yi Xuan. However, Yi Xuan didn't undergo closed-door training, nor did he submerge himself into cultivation as everyone had thought he would. Rather, he had begun to receive tasks in a frantic manner. Many sage disciples were left dumbstruck as they saw the course of these events, and the manner in which those tasks were completed by Yi Xuan. Everyone was trying to guess what Yi Xuan was up to. He wasn't cultivating properly. He was only wandering everywhere after having received the tasks. One could train oneself through these tasks. However, the progress speed wouldn't be quick since one wouldn't be cultivating wholeheartedly. However, the news that Yi Xuan was purchasing great amounts of heavenly treasures and medicinal ingredients got exposure as time passed. And someone guessed that he was collecting materials for some immortality pill. Someone had even asked a great alchemy master in the true martial university regarding this matter. However, that alchemy master wasn't sure which pill Yi Xuan wanted to refine. But he was sure about one thing, and that was that Yi Xuan was collecting materials for some pill. It was reckoned that this pill must be very important. Otherwise, Yi Xuan wouldn't have kept aside his cultivation to collect these materials. People's opinions differed for a moment. Someone said that this was a kind of pill which could increase his strength. Another person said that this might increase his speed. Then, Yi Xuan was informed via a report that the medicinal ingredients which he wanted to collect had been sold out, and none were left in stock as a result. How wouldn't he have understood that the people of the law enforcement hall were behind this matter? The people of the law enforcement hall had also found out that these ingredients were very important for him. Therefore, they had cut down the stock. Yi Xuan and the law enforcement hall's people had grudges. So, they obviously wouldn't provide support if he was in need. Those people of the law enforcement hall are behind this. They have resorted to such a cheap method. Yang Wenjun was enraged by this. He directly pointed a finger at the law enforcement hall. There was no need to inquire about this matter. He knew who was behind this. Yi Xuan was frantically finishing tasks one after another in order to earn the points. So, he had made Deng Shui, Xian, and Yang Wenjun in charge of collecting these medicinal ingredients. He had handed over his points to them, and he had told them to buy these drug ingredients whenever someone would come to sell them. Yi Xuan had barely returned after having completed a task when he heard Yang Wenjun's complaint. However, he wasn't very surprised. What could the law enforcement hall do if their overbearing nature was taken into consideration? But to think that they had resorted to such a cheap method was a bit beyond Yi Xiwen's expectations. Perhaps the name of the Break Sage yellow pill would have spread everywhere if they knew which pill Yi Xuan wanted to refine. Yi Xuan wouldn't be surprised if they had guessed that he was planning to use some alchemy method because it wasn't difficult to guess thus. The only thing which was difficult to guess was the name of the pill he wanted to refine. They had obviously gotten a hold of the list of ingredients Yi Xuan wanted to purchase. However, it was merely a list of ingredients. They would be hard-pressed if they would attempt to guess what they were for. Moreover, they would find themselves against an impossible task if they were to try and find the method to refine the said pill. And they were genuinely underestimating those true ancient grandmasters of alchemy if they felt that it was simple to refine it. In fact, Yi Xuan had been looking forward to this. He wanted them to try and refine a pill on the basis of that list of ingredients. The bad luck that ensue would obviously be theirs in the end. They would have to try millions of times for each pill-making method that would fail. and the law enforcement hall would go bankrupt if they genuinely tried millions of times, since these herbs were extremely costly. However, Yishuin couldn't do anything in this matter. After all, these medicinal ingredients were in the hands of other people, so he couldn't stop them from giving it to anyone they so desired. However, the arrival of a new individual completely solved Yi Zaiwen's problem. It was Northern Dipper Organization's Wood Dragon of the Horn. He had arrived clad in a moon-white robe. However, he didn't have the weak temperament of Qingzus. In fact, he had a stern and chilly air about him on the contrary. He was tall. A wine bottle was hanging on his body, and the strong fragrance of alcohol assailed the nostrils. Yishuin was meeting this Wood Dragon of the Horn for the second time. This man was a little too elusive. In fact, it seemed as if the true martial university wasn't fortified enough for him. He had some special ways that helped him pass unseen. However, he could only evade ordinary security and not the vigilance of genuine experts. "Why have you come here?" Yishuin frowned and asked. "I have arrived here for a good reason," the Wood Dragon replied. "You had asked about some drug ingredients from the organization last time. The organization has the information. It had some of those drug ingredients in its stock, and it has purchased the ones it didn't have at that time." Yi Shiwen remembered that he had requested the Northern Dipper organization to collect these drug ingredients several months ago. However, they hadn't paid much attention to his request at that time. The Northern Dipper was an outstanding organization. However, he had considered them to be an organization which recruited only the disciples of the younger generation. Therefore, he had believed that this organization couldn't be compared with the true martial university. To be continued. Chapter 497. However, he now realized that he had perhaps underestimated the Northern Dipper organization. It was evident that he was unaware about the entirety of their sources. This was obviously dependent on Yi Shiwen, since he was trying to collect those medicinal ingredients by himself. So, it would be very difficult for him to be on par with an organization's speed if he had tried to search them on his pace alone. However, you must know that the organization won't give you these things for free. The Wood Dragon laughed mischievously and said, "It will cost you 5,000 points. However, the organization wants to give you a choice since you've entered the organization recently and don't have accumulated points. The organization can give you these things as long as you complete a task. However, we won't force you. The choice is yours." Yi Shiwen smiled wryly. Did he have any other option in this situation? Chao Yuyu's declaration of war had become an urgent matter for him. One mustn't consider the remaining 10 years' time as a long period of time. 10 years' time wasn't too much for these cultivators. It would pass within the wink of an eye. So, not much time was left for Yi Shiwen. And the Northern Dipper organization certainly had a reputation that they didn't force their members to receive the tasks. However, what if they would offer a task in a situation when one couldn't refuse it? Not refusing would mean as good as accepting the task. The most important thing for Yi Shiwen was to enter the Sage Realm. And it should be mentioned that he had been thinking mostly about this matter of late. "What's the task?" Yi Shiwen asked. He didn't think much. In fact, he couldn't even afford too many thoughts at present. He would plan about further progress only after he had entered the Sage Realm. His foundation was extremely solid and deep. However, this had also strengthened his thresholds beyond the required degree. So, it would be impossible for him to break the next threshold by merely the impact of his words alone, even after a span of 10 years. The thing is that some people have been chasing one of our subordinate members in order to kill him. They are looking for him everywhere. He must be found and rescued. The Wood Dragon spoke up while smiling mischievously. "Which member?" Yi Shiwen asked. He knew a bit about the Northern Dipper organization. He knew that it was an outstanding organization. The leader of the Northern Dipper organization was called Big Dipper Lord, if the rumors were to be trusted. However, nobody had ever seen the Big Dipper Lord. There were 7-star officers underneath him. And then, there were another 14 Constellation members. And all of them were considered as official members of the Northern Dipper organization. There were many reserved Constellation members as well. After that, there were the supporting members under these official members and so on. It was certainly an incomparably huge organization. And this was because of the sheer number of those supporting members. In fact, the Northern Dipper organization would have been a small organization if those supporting members were to be excluded. One of our saboteurs is in the meteor world. The smile on the face of the wood dragon seemed restrained as he said, "Your saboteur is in the meteor world?" Yishuan asked. The meteor world was undoubtedly meteor sex territory. Therefore, the other forces couldn't enter that place very easily. Moreover, it wasn't that easy to send a saboteur there either. You don't ask this from me. I haven't joined the organization far earlier than you either. So, I don't know about a lot of things either. It will sound unpleasant, but you also know that we Constellation members are mere goons who have been hired by the higher-ups to do the things they don't wish to do themselves. The Wood Dragon said. Yi Shiwen was rendered speechless. But this was genuinely the case. He had joined with the Northern Dipper organization very recently. However, it didn't mean that he didn't know anything about them. The Big Dipper Lord was at the top position in the Northern Dipper organization, and those 7-star officers were his direct subordinates. But the Constellation members were basically hired goons. They had powerful strength. They used to unceasingly complete tasks and get whatever they required in return. These Constellation members might never get to see the true colors of the Northern Dipper organization. After all, a hired goon only needed to know what he was supposed to do. These Constellation members were certainly called official members, but the fact was that they might not even know as much as those support members. And that's because those peripheral members were the true subordinates of the Northern Dipper organization. Whereas these Constellation members only used to work for the Northern Dipper organization to get whatever they needed from them in return. Who is this saboteur? Yishuan asked. I don't know much. I only know that this saboteur was the prince of the Great Way Empire in the meteor world. He was developed into a saboteur of our organization from an early age. The original position of the organization was to help him become the emperor. And then, they would slowly help him reach a high-level position in the meteor sect. The Wood Dragon explained. Yi Shiwen gasped. The Northern Dipper organization was very courageous. The meteor sect was a very reputed force. In fact, it could be compared with the true martial university of its most prosperous time. And the Northern Dipper organization had dared to send one of their saboteurs there. He immediately realized that the Northern Dipper organization might also have a saboteur in the true martial university. In fact, the possibility was huge since each big force would position their saboteur in other forces to steal information. However, Yi Shiwen cast away these thoughts from his mind and continued to listen to Wood Dragon. However, he rebelled afterwards. In fact, he was planning to leave the organization. The Wood Dragon continued. Therefore, the higher-ups decided to teach him a lesson to show him his place. So, they've withdrawn the group of people who were sent there to back him up. Aren't you afraid of getting exposed? It won't be good for you if you have to face the meteor's sex wrath. Yi Shiwen asked. A big force like the meteor sect can't do anything to a force like ours. They will most likely turn a blind eye in this matter. Moreover, that prince is quite ambitious. And he's not an idiot either. So, he won't let people find out about his relation with us. Otherwise, forget about acquiring the position of the emperor. Even saving his own life will become an issue for him. The Wood Dragon laughed mischievously and said. However, his expression immediately became serious as he added, It doesn't concern us alone. It concerns you as well, since you are also a member of our Northern Dipper organization now. And Yi Shiwen nodded. He also thought that this was the right step. Every force had extremely harsh punishments for a traitor. In fact, these punishments could leave people to tremble with fear. This had been the case since ancient times, and this was the same in any force. So, that prince wouldn't break his relationship with the Northern Dipper organization on his own accord unless he was an idiot. Moreover, even a formidable force like the Meteor Sect would be at a loss while dealing with an erratic force like the Northern Dipper organization, since the latter was so elusive that even the location of its lair wasn't known to anyone. Therefore, even the power of the meteor sect wouldn't work, since it would be like using an anti-aircraft gun to strike down a mosquito. And that would also be very frustrating. So it would be better for them to turn a blind eye in this matter. However, that prince suffered a defeat at the hands of other princes in a fight once we retracted our assistance. And he's being chased down like a dog ever since. The wood dragon continued to explain, and he has now recalled us. In fact, he's crying for help since people are looking for him everywhere. So, the organization has decided to send us there, since we are the only ones suitable to go there. The meteor world isn't like the true martial world. In fact, a great sage expert would quickly get caught by them if he doesn't have any extraordinary method to hide his presence. A bunch of forces had risen abruptly in the true martial world after the true martial university's decline, and the line of control of each force had crisscrossed with each other's. This had left behind many loopholes, and the wood dragon could easily travel around through those loopholes. However, the meteor sect was different. They had extremely tight control over their territory. So, it wasn't easy to enter that place. Sage experts were undoubtedly very low-key when compared to the glamorous great sage experts. So, it wasn't easy to catch them. It will take more than 10 years to reach the meteor world from the true martial world by flying, and that too if we don't take any rest, eat, or drink anything in between. So he would have been chopped into pieces by those people by the time we reached there. Yi Shiwen said, the true martial world was very far away from the meteor world. So, it would take a few years' time to reach there, even if he were to unfold his devil wings and fly at his best speed. And everything would be over by that time, since that prince would have been chopped into pieces by then. Yi Shiwen clearly knew about the cruelty and brutality of the fights of these imperial clans. He had understood this because of his enmity with the 8th Prince Yue. We have an advantage. We can use the organization's hidden teleportation portal. The wood dragon smiled mischievously and said, they would quickly reach there with the help of portal. And they wouldn't have to fly for more than 10 years in that case. Moreover, the universe was a very dangerous place. So, it would have been very depressing if they had died on their way there. Just the two of us will go there? Yi Shiwen asked. Of course. It's just a fight between the princes. That's all. So, sage experts will be enough to keep watch. The wood dragon replied. Wouldn't that emperor have been worried if our prince were to be very powerful? Yi Shiwen pondered over this matter for a moment. There's always a necessity of balance and power inside a force for its operations to be smooth. He then said, when we are leaving, it would be better if we leave immediately. The sooner, the better. I'm afraid that the boy who doesn't even know the profoundness of this world will get slaughtered. The wood dragon added in an eccentric manner. Okay, let me say goodbye to my senior sister and senior brother. Only Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin were present on the entire Hidden Star Peak apart from second sister, who had been undergoing closed-door training and cultivating like a madman for many years. So, he would wish to inform them that he was leaving. This was the first time that Yi Shiwen would participate in a task as a member of the Northern Dipper organization. So, he took off his cyan-colored robe and put on a white-colored robe in its place. It looked neat and refreshing. Yi Ziwen seniors only asked him to be careful, but they didn't ask where he was going since it wasn't necessary. They flew away into the starry sky after they came out of the true Martial University. The Northern Dipper organization's teleportation portal was situated in the space, since it would have been discovered very easily by others if it were to be set up on land. And one could imagine what would have happened if people had discovered it. These are the medicinal ingredients that the organization has gathered. They had asked me to give these materials to you in advance if you agreed. I don't know which immortality pill you are planning to refine. However, it will obviously be helpful for us if your strength promotes. In fact, we could also complete this mission easily if your strength manages to increase. The wood dragon took out a cosmos sack and threw it towards Yi Shiwen. The wood dragon could also see that these ingredients were materials required for alchemy. However, he couldn't tell which pill Yi Shiwen wanted to refine. Yi Shiwen swept out his divine sense and confirmed that these were genuinely the same medicinal ingredients which he had wanted. He obviously became happy as a result. In fact, the Northern Dipper organization had suddenly grown to have this generous imagine in his mind. One could even say that he felt as if it was quite difficult for people to have ill intentions towards them. After all, these goons were also similar in that regard, since they had agreed to get hired by the higher-up so that they could take advantage of the Northern Dipper organization and vice versa. It was clearly visible that Northern Dipper organization possessed some high-handed management skills. The organization was quite relaxed. However, its cohesion clearly wasn't small. To be continued. Chapter 498. Forces only used to give two things to their subordinates under normal circumstances: reward and punishment. Yi Shiwen had never come across the word punishment. However, he had already obtained too many rewards in the beginning itself. So, it was difficult for him to not have a good opinion regarding the Northern Dipper organization. He was obviously very excited after he obtained the medicinal ingredients. However, he became calm afterwards. He could refine the Break Sage Yellow Pill and make the breakthrough into the Sage Realm. The current situation was completely different from when he would make the breakthrough into the Sage Realm. Only the Sage experts were considered the top-notch experts in the true Martial University's main force. He certainly did possess the Sage-level fighting strength at present. However, he only possessed the fighting strength of Sage Realm, and nothing more. His actual realm was still stuck in the late stage of the semi-Sage realm. Moreover, his strength would advance by leaps and bounds once he'd make the breakthrough into the Sage realm. In fact, even Qiao Yiyu wouldn't have the power to fight back once that would happen. Qiao Yiyu was a Heaven's Pride expert of his generation. So his tyrannical strength had become even stronger with time. Plus, his realm was already far ahead of Yi Zaiwen's. He was about to enter the half-step Great Sage realm. He possessed unfathomable strength. Yi Shiwen took out the mask of the golden dragon of the neck and put it on after they entered the space. It was a dragon mask. He soon found out that this mask had a special function. It could isolate the divine senses. Nobody could see his appearance under the mask as long as he had worn it. Only their Big Dipper Lord could recognize the members of their organization. In fact, the rest of the people may not come to know about the other members' appearance in their entire lifetime, since their identities were kept secret. This had been done to prevent the disturbance that might arise in the real lives of the members of the organization because of their identities. He looked at the Wood Dragon, who had also put on the mask of Wood Dragon of the Horn. His facial features weren't visible. In fact, Yi Shiwen didn't even know Wooden Dragon's real name so far. The two of them had arrived in the vast space after having come out of true Martial World's atmosphere. They then arrived in a desolate meteorite zone under the guidance of the Wood Dragon. There was a teleportation portal hidden among these countless and densely packed meteors. The Wood Dragon made a hand seal and opened the portal. The two of them strode forward and entered it. Then they quickly disappeared inside this meteor field. The true Martial World was situated extremely far away from the meteor world. Therefore, it took them almost half a month's time to reach the boundary of the meteor world, even though they had traveled via a teleportation portal. They would come out of one portal and go into another. They had consequently traveled through various different channels in this half a month's time. There were channels of all sizes, and it was hard to say how many portals they had to go through by the end of it. Finally, we have arrived. An expert below the Great Sage Realm suffers a lot during interstellar travel. The Wood Dragon looked a little depressed as he spoke up. His voice sounded like a buzz as it passed through that dragon mask and came out. Great Sage Realm and Sage Realm were two entirely different stages. In fact, it was no big deal for Great Sage experts to touch the magical powers of space principle to such an extent that they could manipulate the size of space itself. And this obviously came in handy during interstellar travel. That guy's given us so much trouble. I really wish to slap him to death. Wood Dragon waved his hand and made a slapping gesture. He had become very irritated after having switch portals for half a month. Let's go. It won't be beneficial for either of us if that guy gets chopped to pieces. Yi Shiwen opened his mouth and spoke. His voice sounded like the buzzing sound that's produced by the collision of gold and iron. They stealthily swept past the interstellar space on their rainbow lights. The meteor world had experts in abundance. In fact, their numbers here were even higher than the one inside the true martial world. They finally plunged into the atmosphere of the meteor world after they had flown for several more hours. "Let's go. That boy isn't far away." The wood dragon spoke up with excitement. He was holding a talisman in his hand, and this talisman could detect the prince's presence. The two of them had already rushed down to the sea area. They possessed the strength of Sage Realm, so their speed was extremely quick as they were trod on the rainbow light. They rushed to the deeper region of the sea. The mighty waves were surging under their feet. The demon beasts inside the roaring sea were frequently attacking them. However, Yishuan didn't need to attack. The wood dragon would use his imposing aura and suppress those incautious demon beasts to death. Yishuan remembered that he had also fought with demon beasts in the deeper region of the East Sea in order to train. And the demons beasts of this sea weren't inferior to those in the East Sea in any aspect. However, it was impossible for these demon beasts to cause any trouble for them. A sage expert was enough to make the sea a dead zone up to the radius of thousands of miles. "I can sense he must be nearby," the wood dragon spoke up. The two of them immediately became wary because they knew that people must be chasing that prince in order to kill him. And he was nearby, so there was a possibility that his enemies could also be around. And these two might have to face a bitter struggle in that case. Yishuan restrained his divine aura, and his body melted into the void. He had managed to conceal his figure in a very efficient manner. 23rd Prince, will you still not surrender? Your subordinates are already dead. Only you are left. Do you still think that you can escape? Someone arrived on the rainbow light as this ice-cold shout was heard from far away. Yishuan looked on with rapt attention. He spotted a young man who seemed approximately 20 years old. He was clad in a magnificent robe. His facial features were quite outstanding. However, he looked in a very distressed state at this time. His magnificent robe had been torn into shreds from several sides. Several huge wounds had also been opened on his body. Some of those wounds had already dried up, while blood was still gushing out from some others. The real elemental energy was shining feebly on his body. In fact, it was flickering. So, it was evident that he was very exhausted. Yishuan immediately realized that this man must be that idiot prince as told by the wood dragon. He was presumably the one they were looking for. The wood dragon had explained that this man had gotten the support of the Northern Dipper organization at first. However, he had then wanted to leave the organization. He genuinely was an idiot. There was nothing wrong if he had wanted to leave the organization. However, he must have looked at his strength first. He had clearly overreached himself. So, he was now paying for his mistake. Several rainbow lights were pursuing him closely, and they were getting increasingly closer to him. Principles seemed to be twining in the auras of the pursuers. All of them turned out to be the experts of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. Moreover, a senior expert having outstanding aura was behind them. He was steadily following everyone from behind. He seemed like a senior expert of the intermediate stage of the sage realm. He had a childish face, and he was clad in splendid clothing. His strength was extremely dreadful. Moreover, he was the one who had spoken those words. I didn't expect that he would be the only one remaining. It seems that his subordinates have already died. Moreover, a sage expert is leading a team to chase and kill him. It's not surprising that he's in such a distressed state. He looks like a dead dog. The wood dragon spoke up after he had swept out his divine sense. He had spoken this in a disdainful tone, but his gaze was firmly fixed on that old man who had a baby face. His subordinates haven't died yet. They've left him so that he can be brought under the control of the Northern Dipper organization. Yishuan took a pause and corrected him. You're right. However, these are top-level matters. We're merely hired goons and nothing more. So, why do you care about these things? Do you wish to compete with the 7-star officers? There's no vacancy among the 7-star officers at this time. But you may have a chance if you can get rid of any one of them. The wood dragon laughed mischievously and replied. Yishuan didn't pay attention to his sudden leap of thoughts. Was it a joke? Yishuan hadn't seen those 7-star officers. However, he had heard about them from the wood dragon. Each of those 7-star officers was a senior expert at the peak of the great sage realm, and they wouldn't require too much strength to crush him to death. Therefore, Yishuan wasn't thinking about this for now. He and the Northern Dipper organization were merely taking advantage of each other. The Constellation members were only considered as goons who had been hired by the high-level experts. So, he didn't need to pay attention to the secret matters of the Northern Dipper organization. Moreover, he could decide whether he wanted to receive the tasks or not. However, things would change in their entirety once he became a star officer. He would obviously get integrated into the Northern Dipper organization's core. But he would also have to participate in the Northern Dipper organization's management and future plans. And he didn't want that. Give up any such idea, the 23rd Prince shouted back in an angered voice. Then a huge power burst out of his body. He was young. However, he was also a senior expert of the late stage of the semi-sage realm. So, it wasn't surprising that he had managed to escape under the nose of several senior semi-sage experts. However, he was struggling to escape from a sage expert. Yishuan secretly nodded. He isn't ready to give up in this adverse situation. In fact, he seems prepared for a major fight on the contrary. It's not surprising that the Northern Dipper organization had placed their bets on him, and had sent him inside the meteor world as their saboteur. Yishuan knew that this man wasn't the only saboteur of the Northern Dipper organization in the meteor world. However, this scene was enough to prove that this 23rd Prince wasn't as incapable as the Wood Dragon had said. Get ready to attack, the Wood Dragon said. It won't be easy to deal with this old man. You keep him engaged for a moment. I will return to back you up after I've wiped out those subordinates of the semi-sage realm. The Wood Dragon wasn't aware of Yi Zaiwen's fighting strength. So, he felt that it would best if Yi Shiwen could keep this old man of the intermediate stage of the sage realm engaged for a while. And then, both of them could defeat him together in the end. Then, don't you blame us for resorting to extreme methods. That baby-faced old man was still smiling. It didn't seem like he was talking about this matter. In fact, it seemed as if he was talking about a matter that wasn't terrifying at all. That old man stretched out his big hand to grab the 23rd Prince. It wasn't some martial technique, and it wasn't some magical power either. It was just an average big hand that had swept out. However, it gave off a feeling of calamity as it swept out. Bang! His big hand rose in the sky against the wind. And it became bigger and bigger as it rose. It then swept down towards the 23rd Prince to arrest him. It seemed as if it would grab him to death very shortly after. Attack! Suddenly, a loud shout came out from the void. Then, 2 figures came out flying from the void. They carried incomparably dreadful auras. It seemed as if mountains and rivers had reversed their directions, while sun and moon had lost their brightness. In fact, it seemed as if these 2 individuals were the only ones present in the world at this time. Who are you? Why do you wish to save this trash? Aren't you afraid of offending our Great Way State's 4th Prince? The old man saw these 2 men clad in moon-white robes. However, he couldn't see their faces. Instead, he only saw the shadows of 2 individuals who wore monstrous masks. And this made him fearful and apprehensive to some extent. To be continued. Chapter 499. What 4th Prince of Great Way State? I haven't heard of him. The Wood Dragon picked his ear and made a contemptuous gesture. The old man's complexion sank when he saw this. He then spoke. Do the 2 of you really wish to oppose us? The old man could see that it wouldn't be easy to deal with Yi Shiwen and the Wood Dragon, and this had left his heart to palpitate. Otherwise, a man of his temperament would have rushed up to kill them without wasting any time in idle talk. Great, you've finally arrived. The 23rd Prince became relaxed when he saw both of them. He had been dragging this matter in the hope that the people of the Northern Dipper organization would arrive. Things had gotten out of hand, and he had consequently realized that he was too inexperienced. He used to believe that he possessed enough strength, and thus he wanted to fly alone. However, he would never have imagined that the Northern Dipper organization would stop caring about him and would make him land in such a critical situation. The wood dragon shot a glance at him. However, he didn't pay much attention to this prince since he believed the man to be an idiot. He was all jolly and frank when he was with Yi Shiwen. But that was because he believed that Yi Shiwen was qualified enough to be at a par with him. After all, who was Wood Dragon? He was one of the top Heaven's Pride experts of the younger generation. So, he didn't pay any attention to ordinary Heaven's Pride experts, let alone an unworthy person like the 23rd Prince. However, Yi Shiwen nodded after he saw the 23rd Prince. Yi Shiwen didn't possess that unfathomable arrogance which the Wood Dragon did. In fact, Yi Shiwen felt that there was no need for such kind of arrogance. The old man was looking at these two individuals in a fearful manner. He hadn't expected that the 23rd Prince was still hiding behind a force. Moreover, it was evident that these two individuals weren't the 23rd Prince's subordinates. So, they might belong to the force he had joined hands with. This had immediately made him vigilant. They had dared to interfere in the matter of the Great Wei State's royal clan. Moreover, they had conveniently sent two sage experts here. Perhaps it wasn't an ordinary force, and the situation might get reversed since the 23rd Prince had the support of such a force. It seems that you genuinely wish to oppose us, that old man spoke up in a deep voice. Then, don't blame us for being impolite. He was afraid of these two men. However, he was also quite proud of himself. After all, a sage expert was powerful enough to run amok in a region. Attack! The wood dragon shouted loudly. He suddenly trod forward, and the void got shattered because of that. He then suddenly appeared in front of those semi-sage experts. Bang! A semi-sage expert was caught off guard, and he got killed by Wood Dragon's quick attack as a result. In fact, the Wood Dragon had broken his skull in one fist attack. He couldn't possibly have survived this. Stop! The old man became scared and angry. He hadn't expected that these two individuals would resort to extreme methods. They simply weren't holding back. He stretched out his fists towards the Wood Dragon. It was an incredible iron fist. He had practiced an extraordinary fist technique. He certainly looked old. However, his pair of fists was extremely powerful. In fact, it was an illustrious fist technique. Wait a moment. Your opponent, Yi Shiwen finally decided to move. A fire-colored big hand stretched out. It seemed as if the fire cloud's falling sky hand could stir the earth and shatter the horizon when displayed by Yi Shiwen. The old man promptly withdrew his attack from the Wood Dragon and shot his iron fists towards Yi Shiwen to face his attack. His fists had condensed from his entire Bodis energy and looked like mountains as they swept over. Rumble! It was a startling collision. The mountain-like iron fists and sky-falling hands suddenly collided with each other. Terrifying energy waves formed at the spot of collision and swept across. It seemed as if they'd engulf the whole world. In fact, it seemed as if the entire space would be torn into shreds. Ah! A loud scream passed through endless light screens. That old man went flying in the sky as blood splashed out from his body. His pair of iron fists had been shattered by Yi Shiwen. He screamed endlessly. The figure that had stood firmly in the void this entire time had been forced to retreat. Poof! The old man spouted blood from his mouth. He was in disbelief as he saw the figure of this man who wore a dragon mask, and he couldn't believe that he was unable to stop even his one move of his. He had been immersed in practicing this fist technique his entire life. He had progressed and perfected the fist technique to an extremely profound level. In fact, his fists were also known as incomparable iron fists. They could pulverize the entire world. He could even dare to resist a sage tool with his iron fists. However, he didn't expect that his iron fists would get fractured and collapse in front of a single attack from Yi Shiwen. Countless cracks had proliferated from his fingers. In fact, they had reached up to his arms. Blood was gushing out from his arms. This scene looked exceptionally shocking. He had felt as if a terrifying force was crushing his body a moment ago. That big hand had swept down with such a crushing force that it seemed like it could crush the world itself. He would have been done for if it weren't for his iron fists, which had withstood most of that overwhelming force. This attack could have split open his body. Moreover, he saw that his opponent had barely moved. It was evident that his opponent's body was extremely tyrannical. In fact, it was beyond anyone's imagination. The old expert had killed and crushed many opponents to reach the Sage realm. Most of his opponents had been ordinary talents, and all of them had died at his hands. However, he had never come across an expert so terrifying that he literally seemed like a god. A gust of wind began to blow. It gave rise to waves of bloody aura. It blew the corner of the hem of Yi Zaiwen's moon-white-colored robe. In fact, it looked as if it was floating in the air. Everyone was stunned when they saw this scene. No matter whether it was those semi-sage experts or the 23rd Prince or the Wood Dragon, all of them had been struck dumb in that very instant. A mere palm attack had crushed the offensive of that old man in its entirety. Just how dreadful was his physique. They could swear that they had never seen such a ferocious physique. His opponent was a great expert of the intermediate stage of the Sage realm. Moreover, his iron fists were very powerful. However, they had been broken by a mere palm attack of this man's. Those semi-sage experts felt despair as they saw this scene. That sage-level old man was their backbone. These semi-sage experts looked insignificant in this clash between sage-level experts. After all, evil geniuses like Yi Shiwen were very rare to come across. However, this sage-level old man didn't have the power to fight back in front of Yi Shiwen. Moreover, he had collapsed at the first encounter, and this had pushed them into the abyss of despair. It seemed like they would collapse any moment now. That 23rd Prince was also left dumbstruck when he saw this scene. He hadn't expected that he would see such a scene. That old man had been chasing him since a long time. So, he obviously knew that the said old man was very frightening. He had survived till now, but he knew that it wasn't like the old man couldn't kill him. In fact, saying that would be total nonsense. Moreover, he knew that the old man was mere playing hide-and-seek with him, just like a cat plays with a mouse. The old man wanted to tease him before finishing him off. However, the same old man had nearly died by a single slap from Yi Shiwen. So, this man had to be extremely terrifying, and endless revere had arisen in his heart for the Northern Dipper organization. Only some peripheral members of the Northern Dipper organization had been there to accompany him at first. There were a few sage experts among them. However, there wasn't anyone as terrifying as Yi Shiwen. How ferocious would this organization be if it had even a few such terrifying experts? It would simply be unimaginable. The thought of leaving the Northern Dipper organization and being a lone, evil genius had immediately vanished from his mind as a result of this realization. He obviously didn't have any other way either. Well, he at least didn't have such strength at present. However, the one who was stunned the most was none other than Wood Dragon. He also hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen could be so powerful. He was very proud of himself. After all, he was an expert of the intermediate stage of the Sage realm, even though he was from the younger generation. However, he was still quite afraid of that old man, since he must have been cultivating for God knows how many years. So, he had planned that he would deal with that old man along with Yi Shiwen. However, he hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen would single-handedly beat him up like a dog. Crap, this guy is abnormal. The Wood Dragon had no choice but to say this. He finally understood why Qing Su had strongly recommended Yi Shiwen for becoming a member of the Northern Dipper organization. One must know that the Northern Dipper organization was a very loose organization. However, it didn't mean that they wouldn't inspect a person before they'd make them a member of the organization. The Northern Dipper organization had decided to examine Yi Shiwen and had made him a member after he had been strongly recommended by Qing Su. "Young man, don't be so crazy," that old man roared. Those horrifying cracks on his iron fists had gradually begun to heal. Moreover, his complexion had turned abnormally red. It was evident that he was using some secret technique in order to fix his injuries. He had soon regained the original cold and metallic luster. Then, that old man launched an attack at Yi Shiwen in order to kill him. A pair of fists swept down like small mountains, and it seemed as if they wanted to crush the world. He had instilled his entire life's martial arts power into this pair of iron fists. Consequently, this time's attack had left everyone numb as it swept out. It was far more tyrannical than the previous attack. However, Yi Shiwen didn't even look at him. He obviously didn't want any more trouble. So, he didn't use the fire cloud's falling sky hand this time. Instead, he used his current top technique, Big Bang Stardust Fist. Yi Shiwen had gotten very used to the fire cloud's falling sky hand. And this wasn't the case with the Big Bang Stardust Fist yet. In fact, he had even deduced the essence of the fire cloud's falling sky hand technique. However, his understanding of the Big Bang Stardust Fist was still higher than that of this technique. He had practiced the Big Bang Stardust Fist for several years. So, it could be said that he had comprehended this fist technique to the pinnacle. "Ah!" the old man roared. His attack arrived in front of Yi Shiwen within the blink of an eye. Yi Shiwen could almost feel that the wind pressure was tearing apart his facial skin. Bang! Yi Shiwen suddenly shot his fist, and it pounded on that old man's iron fist like a big star. Crunch, a horrifying sound of breaking of bones reverberated. That pair of iron fists had been broken in the sky once again. Moreover, the condition of the injury was far more dreadful this time. In fact, his entire fist had been badly mangled and mutilated. That old man again spouted a mouthful of blood. His fists had been badly mutilated by Yi Shiwen. He didn't possess an insanely powerful body like Yi Shiwen. Only his fists were extremely powerful. However, they had directly been damaged at this time. He had finally realized that he wasn't a match for this man in the dragon mask. So, he promptly turned around to make his escape. However, how Yi Shiwen could let an enemy escape? He immediately shot his Big Bang Stardust Fist once again. The old man screamed loudly. His body was blasted by the fist's impact. It then broke and he died at once. To be continued. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.